Okay, so if I can get everybody really quickly, can you jump back into your Capture One again? Hopefully you still have those images that are sitting in Capture One. If you guys could go back there for me really quickly, I just want to show you a couple other things that are going on here and ways to think about this and work with this and use this. So Capture One, as it stands right now, I think the current price of it is $499. I could be wrong about that. It could be $399. It used to be right around around $300. They have sales all throughout the year, so if it's something that you want to buy into, make sure that you watch for the sales. Don't pay full price for it. They also have a thing called Certified Professional, so it's Capture One Certified Professional, which is a 2-day workshop that actually, it's a 2-day intensive workshop that Capture One puts on, and if you get through it and pass their exam at the end of it all, you become what they call a Certified Professional, and you go up into a database and on a list, and whenever anybody is coming in from out of town and they're looking for someone to be a digital tech or a photo assistant for them, everybody goes to this list and they look at this list first. Because it just lets them, again, I told you this program is pervasive throughout the industry. There's nobody who does not use it. There's no studio that does not use it. So it's just, if you do the 2-day workshop, I think the 2-day workshop is about the same thing. I think it's about $500. Don't quote me on any of this. But if you do it, you get a free copy of Capture One. So there's an incentive in it. I realize it's a lot of money. What I can say to you about Capture One, the way it typically works is that you will have, so they're on version 12 right now. I'm still using version 11. To be perfectly honest with you, you can get away with version 9 right now. The biggest difference that happens between the jumps has to do with their color processing engines. They change remarkably, and in most cases, most people I know believe, and this is something, again, specific to people who shoot especially fashion shooters, most people argue that the skin tones that are processed out of Capture One are far superior to anything else that's actually out there on the market. There's a lot of processors that are out on the market. It's not, Capture One's not the only one. Adobe Photoshop, Camera Raw is not the only one. There's a bunch of them. Vibble is another one. DxO is another one. And so for any of you guys who've ever done any black and white film processing, I think you all know you can always pick, film and developer combinations give you slightly different results. In some cases, radically different results. The same thing holds true here in the processing world. The things that you'll get out of Capture One will be different than the things that you get out of Adobe Camera Raw. So it's just something to keep in mind, to think about. Again, I'm not here to sell you gear, I'm not here to sell you software, but that's just sort of that reality. To show you what the experience, yes?
If you were to do something like this, would you think that it would be likely that you would actually get some sort of work from it, like if you're on this list?
Oh, absolutely. I know people who work from it who do work. If anybody's coming in town and doesn't know or doesn't have a connection and they're looking for it, they're getting somebody off that list. Yeah. So no, every digital tech that I work with swears by it. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that part out there. However, before you buy this doesn't mean that you can't use this very same setup and this very same system in your own work. So it is indeed possible to shoot tethered into Lightroom. The problem that we run into with Lightroom is this, and I think you guys would probably know if you've had any experience in working in Lightroom. In Lightroom, you never get a direct RGB readout. You ever notice that? You get percentages. And the reason you never get a direct readout is that you've never established your color space in Adobe RGB. In Lightroom. In Camera Raw, you actually do establish your color space, and you will get different readings based on that part. So it's more difficult to do this work in Lightroom. It's more difficult, even though you can tether into Lightroom, to actually get a legitimate numerical reading like we're using on this thing right now to determine your exposure is impossible to do in Lightroom for the most part. But it's not in Photoshop. And to show you how that works, if you're in, please just go into Camera Raw, into Capture One, and get to the last file that you shot, the one that actually has the correct reading. So I'm going to show you mine up here on the screen. So this is my one right here. Again, I've color neutralized in the middle patch right here. I'm hovering over this, and you can see in my case I'm getting a 249 in the luminosity. If my color balance is really perfect, then I should have all the same numbers in my red, green, and blue. Now here I've got a red of 250, a green of 249, and a blue of 248. Those single points are so close to one another as to be negligent. I mean, I know if you guys are actually adjusting your exposure, you'll notice a third of a stop could kick you a pretty good ways. You know, you could go, a third of a stop is not like 5 points, it's like 15 points. So there's no real correlation between the two, but what I'm trying to say to you is that to have 1 point off in here for the most part is close enough. Nobody in the world would ever know that it isn't exact. However, you'll notice that my luminosity in this place is a 249. If you grab your thumbnail, the thumbnail that is your final one, you can actually drag that on top of Photoshop and it will bring it into Camera Raw for you. So it's a seamless thing. Now, for those of you who work at Bridge, you simply need to navigate to the captures folder. We'll take a look at that in just 1 second again. And you can do this very same thing on Bridge. For those of you who work in Lightroom, you can actually just do an import from the captures folder into Lightroom. And then your workflow, as you noted up until this point, would be fine and you would just go on. Does that sort of make sense? But you'll notice here when I bring this into Camera Raw, it actually is no longer color balanced. That color balance metadata information was left behind. It's still back in Capture One. It will stay in Capture One, but the translation from Capture One into Camera Raw loses all of that. So we need to color balance again. To do that, simply come up to the white balance tool. It's the third tool along the very top. Click on this. Click on the white balance tool right here. You'll see it brings that warmth back into, and then hover over this patch again. And in this case now, you'll see that my color values have actually jumped slightly. Again, I went from a 249 to a 251. It's not a game changer. It wouldn't break the bank. I would probably stay here at this very same situation. I don't think I would change my exposure dramatically here, but in the older days, in older versions of Capture One, you can actually have a jump of 10 points. And in that case, I would actually reset my exposure because I would be at least comfortable in getting the readouts here. The reason you're getting these two different sets of readings again is these are two different processing engines. They process stuff slightly different. And even though everything's color balanced, even though everything's neutralized, even though it's all that stuff, whatever, these sort of things happen. So I just wanted to make you guys aware of that. However, if you want to use this method on your work right now and you don't want to do anything else but get your hands on one of these color cards, for me, the way I would do this if I was out on location shooting is that I would shoot, this 2 card. I would throw my card into a card reader. I would have my laptop with me, and I would open it up into Camera Raw just like this. I would do my color neutralizing. I would read the white patch, and I would know where I was with my exposure, and then I would do those reiterations again until I got to what I know my exposure should be, and then I would shoot. So I know a lot of people look at this and say, God, this is so onerous. I can't believe it. You're going so old school here. You're dragging all this gear around, whatever. I'm simply telling you how the pros do it. I'm telling you how it is at the level that I do this work at. Nobody, and I mean nobody, would consider not doing this because nobody would want to be gambling their careers, the money they're making, the whole night. Nobody would do it. And this is just so simple to do. Again, the problem that we've got with using the little, the picture that you get on the back of your camera, there's no way to white balance that. There's no way to set this. It's even more problematic. The little picture that you're looking on the back of the camera is a processed JPEG. So the fact that you did not set up sRGB or you thought it doesn't really matter what sRGB, whether I set it in that or Adobe RGB, whatever, that little readout actually is using those settings to give you that information. But there's no way to measure this stuff. There's no way to do any of this kind of work. So it's, in my opinion, worthless. That little thing on the back of your camera it's great for looking at the menus. You shouldn't look at it for the first image because it's lying. Are there questions about this? So it's the other thing that you should know, and I do this all the time. So imagine I do pictures. We want to do pictures running on the beach. Okay, fine, running on the beach. The classic for running on the beach is the photographer climbs into the trunk of a car, takes a tripod or a C-stand and jams it up so that the ceiling part of the car, the trunk doesn't fall on them. puts their camera onto a tripod, loosens up the ball head at the top so that you keep your pretty good flexibility to go along like that. And then the car just starts to drive along the beach. I shoot tethered. I've got a computer sitting right next to me. I've got that tethered cord that's going right in there. I drive along the beach and models run along the car and you just shoot pictures forever and you can drive and do that shit for as long as you want. It's a great, great, great trick. Other tricks that I've used for doing tracking shots, the same sort of thing, is that you as a photographer do not want to, so I do this, you don't want to do it, but I do this. You actually say, okay, this is going to be my model right here, I'm going to shoot this model right here, so I get all this stuff set up. In case if I'm actually walking, I don't shoot tethered because that distract computers to me. I will shoot the card at that stage of the game, but I will stop between each one of these runs, throw them into the computer, take a look, make sure that things are still, make sure that I'm in focus, make sure that I do have my exposure is still changing, make sure that there's nothing fundamentally wrong with my camera, make sure that the model isn't going, and it's all of those issues. I mean, I get that feedback, right? You've got the potential to get that feedback, and well, if you wouldn't, I would never say it. I would be shooting the card instead of shooting like this and walking backwards. A lot of times I'll have somebody holding my back so that I don't trip and fall or something, so somebody will be spotting me, for lack of a better way of putting it. Or you could, for just a second, no, not that far forward, be back. Or you could have an assistant doing this for you. You're shooting, you're the photographer. Boom, 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 like that works perfect, right? And it goes in both directions. If the models are smart, they know how to go backwards. Does that make sense what you do? We use wheelchairs all the time. If you're working out of a hotel, every hotel in the world has a wheelchair, borrow a wheelchair, and the photographer sits in the wheelchair and they pull it back and you do tracking shots like that. Works great. I would never not do it and then see my results immediately. So for you guys, okay, this is going to be a little random. You'll see this happens with me every now and then, but hopefully it gives you more than you would get in just this sort of like clinical, technical conversation. How fast do you need to have a shutter speed to stop somebody walking?
Depends on lighting conditions.
Depends on what?
Lighting conditions.
In what way?
So if you are using a high-speed flash,
Right?
you could cancel out, say, like the sun, which would be something that could have you seeing the slow exposure movement.
Right.
So that could freeze it at a very low shutter speed.
It
So
could,
that's-
because
that's
in that
a
case,
trick.
though, your strobe is really your shutter speed in that case. So I don't want to get quite that complicated yet. I want to keep this more just as a simple, available light situation, maybe a reflector, maybe not, camera, and a person. How fast your shutter speed do you need to stop somebody? I have a 250, if anybody else. 500, anybody else? 500 is a minimum. 250 you'll track, you'll get motion. 1,000 would be better. 1,000 is truly where you should be. If you have somebody running, 2,000. And again, I've done this for a very long time. And I'm just telling you that's exactly what those numbers are. So if you want somebody walking across the street, walking down the street, you want to make sure that they're sharp. 500th of a second minimum, 1,000 would be better. So at any rate, does this make sense that you can actually still use the system without buying $500 worth of software? Yes.
When I put mine into Photoshop, I was starting to make it easier, but like when I do white balance, it was getting like, it didn't jump, but it, I'm just
Yeah, you do. That's what I was saying. That will actually happen.
okay.
Yeah.
And
So,
then
so in that case, again, if you're never working on a Capture One and you're only working here, I would trust the values and the numbers that you're getting here. So in your case, what we're seeing here is roughly, again, if we color balance into here, because this does not look like that's neutralizing, that is now neutral, and these numbers are now much closer to where you want to be. So in this case, you're at 244, 246, 247. That to me would be well within the range of where you need to be. If you average that out, it's at 245, and it's where you would want to be. Again, if you were to open up your camera a third, you would blow it way out. If you were to stop down a third, you would go way too under. So you would be where it be. One other thing that you should know about in all of this is there are cases where you're shooting, again, this is more directed to the fashion people, not to exclude anybody else. I don't mean that, so I'm just going to quit that, okay? So can we just dispense with the fashion and fashion not and all that kind of stuff and just talk about photography? Why don't we do that, okay? There are times where you will find things in a scene, especially for me, when I shoot fashion, whatever, that are actually whiter than this white patch. A lot of times you will see, again, it's clothing is the most part. The things that I would be worried about, I would never worry about that top, but I would get very nervous about this t-shirt right here. I would get really nervous that that t-shirt, depending on the lighting, could be blowing out. If it is, that becomes the new white patch on in my setup, not the one that I'm looking at on the card. So the card one may be perfect, but all of a sudden I notice that I've got a problem with the white patch, and then I'll actually reset that part accordingly. Does that sort of make sense? There are warnings in Photoshop that you can actually set. They exist right up here at the top in this same panel right here. If you click on these two little buttons that are up at the very top right here, they will actually flag your image for shadow clipping and for highlight clipping. In this case, mine are on and you don't see any, but I can actually change my exposure here so that it does look like so. And so you can see I'm getting a clipping warning in the reds right here, just about bumping it up. That's what's coming up from here. It's this button right here. So you can use that to really quickly see if you're clipping something, if you're burning something out. If I take my exposure way down, and again, this is all being done with software. This is not really legitimate. You'll also see that I'm getting a blue clipping warning that's down here at the bottom. That's telling me that this is actually dropping down at 0, just so you know about that. If you go back, hit cancel out of this and go back into Capture One really quickly, those same things exist in this. This is the final thing that I'm going to really show you about Capture One today, but it's just something that we all use to find out exactly things like this. Is the color card okay, and is something else in my image blowing out that I didn't know was blowing out? To do it, you want to come up to Capture One, come down to Preferences, and inside of Preferences, you want to click on the Exposure tab, and then you want to take this warning right here, this exposure warning, this is your highlight warning right here, and you want to drag this thing down to a 250. Why am I taking this down to a 250? Because my highlight range is 245 to 250, right? So by setting this at 250, if I shoot a picture of that t-shirt and it gets flagged in red, I know it is above 250 and I know I have got a problem. I don't want to set it at 245 because 245 to 250 is actually good for me. So if I set it at 245, I'm in trouble because anything that was in the proper range would be being flagged. Make sense? I also, and they don't have this on by default, but I do enable my shadow warning, and I actually set it at a 15. Again, we're going to talk about shadow point here in just 1 second, and so we'll have a conversation about this a little bit better in a second. So I'm going to close this up to actually turn this on to see if it to see what's getting flagged. It's this little warning triangle that sits right up here at the very top. If you click that on, you'll actually see that it will then flag certain things in red. Now you'll notice that it actually flagged this thing right here for me right here, which is my patch. I wish this thing were more precise than it is. It's not, so that's all I can tell you. If I start to hover over this again, it won't give me anything. It's not, even though you see red on this, it knows that this is a highlight warning flagging for me, so it's not giving me, I'm not getting a red readout. It's not giving me a pure readout here. But as I'm moving around here, you might see, so right at this point, at the very bottom point down here in this patch, this guy actually went over the 251 mark in one of my channels, and that's why this guy is actually being flagged. But it's just information for me. I would still accept this for exactly where I'm at. I feel comfortable. I'm comfortable with this exposure. I wouldn't actually change anything, even though I'm seeing that. I would look at the thing in the back here. I'm wondering what's going on back here. And in this, what you'll see is happening is that this has to do with a purity of color. There's a single channel back here that's actually burning out. We're not burning out, but it's getting near the top end. It's only the red channel. However, this is telling me that I've got massive detail down in these guys, and it's only a luminosity rating of a 223. So it's not something that I would ever worry about. Whatever, I have detail forever back in here. Does that make sense? So are there questions about this? I know this seems really number-centric, but people use this all the time, and it just becomes, again, this is a way to maximize your data capture. This has got nothing to do with exposure. Exposure does not exist in a digital realm the same way it does in film. In film, especially transparency film, you would be going for the look that you wanted. If you want it dark and moody, you would be shooting underexposed to make it dark and moody. But that is a huge mistake to make in digital. Digital, it's all about data. Capture as much data as you can. This method doesn't. Are we good on this? Okay. You can quit capture one. Everything that we wanted out of it so far today, we've actually got out of it. And what I'd like to do now is, okay, let's do this. Let's go find that file one more time. So to find it, mine was in my pictures folder, and you remember I said it's always going to be the very bottom one of any of the naming conventions that you've actually got going. So you can see I've actually got another naming convention that was going on earlier for some other group, whatever this was back in 2018. But because I've got this very same naming convention set up, this is all going now in chronological order, so I know that this is the one that I was working on today. And then I'm going to go look at my capture folder, and you can see here in your capture folder that this is indeed where those captures are. So those 3 images that I made are sitting right here. So again, for those people who are using Bridge, this is the folder you would navigate to. For those who are using Lightroom, this would be the folder you would import, would be this capture folder. Make sense? Okay, but if we simply come to that last frame that we had before and double click on it one more time, we want to reset something in Capture One really quickly. And I just want to show you about this because this came up with Connor earlier, and there's something that I need you guys to understand and set and to think about and talk about. So actually, I take that back. Let's not do it with this image because there's a better way. I've got something else to show you. Cancel out of this guy. We're going to do the same thing I was going to do with that image, but we're going to do it with a separate image. And the one I want you to find is the one that we've already been working with. It was the one of the girl in the woods. So it's in our Class 2 folder. And it's the woods one. It's the one at the very top. However, this time, there's 2 files in here. There's 2 raw files in here. You may have a third file, this XMP file. What's an XMP file? It's the what?
The data or metadata.
It's the metadata. It is metadata. That's very, very true. Anybody tell me anything else? Okay, quick question. What software can you use to edit a raw file? Anybody? Camera Raw. Anybody else? Lightroom. Anybody else? Photoshop. Anybody else? You can't edit a raw file. It's impossible. When digital files first came along, Adobe is who sits behind it all. Every single raw file that you do is actually, you want to really be pissed off at Adobe. Every single raw file that you have, I don't care what your camera is actually a TIFF file. And it's licensed by Adobe. So Adobe licenses their TIFF format to Canon and to Nikon and to all that. And all those people put in a special little header thing that makes a Nikon file, but it's really just a TIFF file. That's all it is. Adobe gets a commission. They get a license fee for every single image you shoot. So how do they figure out what you shoot? Well, when you buy a camera, so you buy your Canon 5D Mark II, there's an estimation that you can make 200,000 captures out of that camera before the sensor's gone. So that camera manufacturer pays Adobe for 200,000 captures for every single camera that they sell. And that comes out of, you pay for that. I know, they get you all the way. Anyway, so Adobe, when they started this whole process, whatever, Adobe clearly was really big on the whole idea of digital capture and digital files and all that, and law enforcement came along and said, well, there's no way we're touching this. And they're like, well, why not? They said, well, I can take my head and put it on your body, and I can change it. So all of a sudden, I'm the guy who did the murder, but then all of a sudden your face is on my face, whatever, and, we're not going to touch that. And so Adobe said to them, okay, well, we'll make you a deal. We will design the file format so that if anybody actually goes in and changes the first thing inside the raw file, it will destroy the raw file. And so law enforcement said, okay, if you do that, then we'll accept your technology, and that's exactly what happened. So you can process a raw file, but you can't edit it. There's no way you can open up a raw file and go in there and change anything in it. If you do, if you manage to get some pirating software that will actually open that stuff up, by design, the file will implode. It will destroy itself. So it was the only way Adobe could guarantee this. So as a consequence, working with raw files becomes very complicated for us because we go in and we want to change the color. We just did color balancing. Well, how do you save that material to a file you can't edit? We want to do, I don't know, all sorts of things in there in Camera Raw. We want to make this change and that change and this change and that change, whatever. None of that can be written into the file. The file itself cannot be edited. So what happens is you end up with these sidecar files. It's called an XMP file. And that XMP file lists all the things that you did into Camera Raw, and then it applies that every time you open that file. Does that make sense? So we're going to see this. Do you guys have an XMP file in your folder? Throw it away from me, please. And then let's just open the first one first. We don't need to open them both yet. We'll open the other one in just a second. So if you'll open up the top one for me really quickly, it will bring this into Camera Raw. If you've still got your highlight and shadow warnings on, you can actually turn them off. For me, I find that stuff usually distracting. So I'm going to show you something that you should be doing right now, but you need to promise me first that you're not going to do anything to this file first. Because what I'm going to do is rebuild a new set of defaults for you inside of Camera Raw so that you don't have to every single time go in and turn on lens correction, turn on remove chromatic aberration. How many of you even do that? Do you do it for every file you open?
Patches.
Oh, God. I would hate my life. Too much work. All right, so here's the deal. To fix that part before you do anything, because what we're going to do is create a new set of defaults for Camera Raw. And if you do anything in here, so let's say you bumped up the exposure by 1/3 of a stop, that would become your new default. So I don't want to do anything. I just want to do the things that we need to be the new default. Does that make sense? Okay, so to do that, I want everybody to come over to, it's the icon that looks a little bit like a camera. It's supposed to be lens correction. And I know we're working on various versions of Photoshop, so if for some reason your icons don't look like my icons, just sing out and we'll figure out which ones are corresponding, because they've redone the interface. So you can see in some of your older versions, there would be another, I forget what it is, it's not this, there's another camera-like thing that's sitting over here. You don't have the film strip thing, anyway. So at any rate, has everybody clicked on the little camera icon guy? Are we good on that? Okay, by default, Adobe ships, there's two tabs in here under lens correction. There's a manual tab and a profile correction. I want you to make sure you're on the profile part. And there's two options that sit up in here that I want you to click on both of these. The first is remove chromatic aberration, and the second one down here is to enable profile corrections. So we're going to see what these things respectively do. We're going to start with just go ahead and turn remove chromatic aberration off. You're not really going to see a lot of a change in here. But now I want you to click on and off the enable profile correction, and I want you to watch what happens to the file itself. Look at the preview of the file, and you can see the problem that is actually happening in here. So if you look down here at the bottom, the lens correction, the lens itself that was being used is being picked up from the metadata. It knows that it knows what lens it is. Actually, it knows what camera it is as well. The camera's sitting right up here. It knows all that. That's coming from the metadata. But at any rate, it knows what lens it is, and they have built a lens, they built a profile for this lens to actually do the correction part. So in this particular lens that I'm working with, if you want to see what's happening, the first thing that's really obvious is that this lens is vignetting horribly at the edges. You're getting a whole lot of vignetting down here, darker up here, all the way along the top. It's typical of wide-angle lenses. Wide-angle lenses are notorious for vignetting. Zoom lenses are even worse, but this is actually a 24-70 2.8 lens. This is actually a good lens. But there still is this problem. Does that sort of make sense? So that's one of the problems with that. Then look at also when I turn this on, look what happens to the actual sides of the image. So what I'm talking about now are these areas that are right in here and the top of this part. You'll notice when I turn this thing on and off, or you turn yours on and off as well, it seems as if the edges are coming towards us now, doesn't it? So what that's telling me is that this lens is suffering from what they call pin cushioning. There's two kinds of lens aberrations that you run into. One is pin cushioning and the other is barrel distortion. In barrel distortion, what's happening is this lens is actually barrel distorted. So what is happening, think about it like a barrel. So look at me, imagine that I have a barrel. It means that this part of me is actually, the center part of me is actually sticking out. Imagine the side of a barrel, right? And that the edges, as it goes around like this, are retreating. So that would be barrel distortion. To correct for that, you need to take the sides and bring them forward. And that's exactly what's happening here when you do this. You can see, doesn't it seem like the illusion of those sides is coming closer to the front of the frame, to the edge of the frame? So the opposite of that is pin cushioning. In pin cushioning, the center actually seems to be pushed in. So if you think of, again, a pin cushion, I don't know if anybody here sews, whatever, but a pin cushion, it's a thing that holds pins for people who like sew. If you take a pin and you push it on this cushion, it actually causes the center to press in until the pin actually goes through. That's the illusion that you're getting. Pin cushioning and barrel distortion are the exact opposite of one another. So if you have a pin cushion issue, you get it barrel distorted. And if you have a barrel distortion when you put pin cushioning on it, and it does the correction. But when you looked at this file, did you know that there was a mistake? Did you know that there was one of these? No, you don't. So again, this is one of those issues where they've gone in, they've actually profiled the performance of this lens. They put these all in the library that you get. So for me, this is something I think I want on the whole time, and I do. So go ahead and click on it to enable it. Then I need everybody to zoom. Look at this area of the tree branches right down here. I need everybody to zoom into this, and you need to come into 400%. So I've clicked on the magnifying glass tool, and I'm going to come into this guy to 400%. Again, you can see your percentage readout right down here in the lower left-hand corner. You can't really spot chromatic aberration at anything less than 400%, and anything greater than 400%, you might spot it, but you may not, because of the way the screen is actually being redrawn. But Adobe will always suggest to you that when you're looking for chromatic aberration, that you actually look for it here at 400%. And what I want everybody to look at are the edges of the branches. And if you look at the edges of the branches, it's not so obvious on this projector, but it's pretty obvious on my screen right here. Right along this line of this really heavy branch right here, I see this incredibly strong green line. You guys see that in yours? It's a little more subtle, but it's still there nonetheless. If you actually look on the exact opposite side of that, you'll see a magenta line as well. That is chromatic aberration, and what happens in chromatic aberration, what's really going on in this is, well, does anybody know why this happens?
The different colors of light hitting the sensor at slightly different angles.
It's not angle so much as focus is what it is. But you're on the exact right track, because that's exactly what happens. So here is what basically goes on in a lens. Light waves, we're not going to get too much into light theory here as far as that goes. Light waves, but basically, if you think about light waves, you guys all know Roy G. Biv, right? Basically the rainbow, right? So we go from red all the way down to what we would call blue, indigo, violet would be down here. Red light waves tend to be very big and broad like this, whereas violet light waves tend to be much, they have a much tighter wavelength is what they really call this. The same thing happens in music. This would be considered bass. This would be considered really high-end, really, high-end, really high notes. Does that sort of make sense? That's why every single person in this room has probably had this happen to them. When your neighbors play the music way too loud, what you really hear is bass. It's because the light waves are so long they can actually reach you. The ones that are so short, really high-end, high vocals, all that kind of stuff, whatever, pretty much get absorbed because the light waves are too short. Well, this same thing happens actually in a lens situation. What happens in a lens situation, if we look at the sensor, so this is the sensor right here. This is my lens right here. And this is my camera right here. And what happens is that if I have a red wave coming in like this, basically what they do is they try to split the difference in all of these, because what happens is that light waves don't focus all in the same place. And so what happens in this case is that anything that would be considered mid-wave, so I'm going to do mid-waves like this, actually would be focused right on the sensor like that. When you focus the lens, it'll focus the what we would call the mid color, so Roy G. Biv. So it's going to be sort of in the greenish-ish area, but not actually the greens. The red waves actually are much bigger, and the problem with that is that they actually focus right past this sensor. And the blue waves, which are much, much, much shorter, actually stop short and they focus right in front of the sensor. So it is impossible with a conventional lens to actually focus all three of the light wavelengths at the sensor. And what this is actually the blurring coming from the fact that this color of light is actually being focused a little bit behind the sensor, and this one is actually being focused a little bit before the sensor. Does that make sense? Anybody in this room ever heard of an apochromatic lens? They exist, especially when you get into the medium format group. Old school. Some of the most famous apochromatic lenses in the world were actually built for Hasselblad. So anybody shooting film, Hasselblad 5 series or ELX series or any of that series, they had a 250 millimeter apochromatic lens. It was only $15,000-$20,000, and that was like back in the 70s. So what they do is they make it's extremely difficult lens design. It's extremely, but you'll find these things. They exist. There are people who make them. But basically what they're designed to do is correct this problem, and they will actually, through this really twisted series of very special glass and very whatever, they will focus everything right on the sensor, and you do not have chromatic aberration. But for the rest of us, we have software. However, when I first did this file, when this file was first one of mine, this did not exist in Camera Raw, so I retouched that out by hand. Yeah, that sucked. So at any rate, if you're in here looking at it right now, watch the green part right here, just click on the remove chromatic aberration and it's gone. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that those two things are two things that you always want to have happen to all of your files. And you don't want to have to go in here and do this every single time. Correct? So to make it that way, now simply come over to the very edge. So you'll look up here at I'm right over here in this little menu, drop-down menu right here. Click on that drop-down menu, and you want to come down, and you actually want to save new camera raw default. Do not save settings. That's not what we're doing here. We are building a new camera raw default. And go ahead and click on that, and this behavior now is standard. So people who do this batch, people who do whatever, you'll never have to do that again. This is standard until you turn this off. Now, if for some reason you screwed this up and you realize, oh my God, I did a white balance first and I added a third of the stop to my exposure and that's now my new default, you simply go to this very same menu again, click on it, and come down and reset camera raw defaults, and this will take you back to Adobe's shipping version of what happens with all of these things turned off. Are we good on this? Okay, back to the main screen right now. So here in the main screen, this now is going to work for us. I feel good about that part. You can go ahead and cancel this to close it up, and then I want you to actually, and I'll take it back. Let's not do that. Let's go ahead and just find it again. Open the very same file again, if you will, for me really fast. Okay. So what I want everybody to do is look at this, look at the color temperature of this file right here, and you can see that the color temperature on this file is 4,600 degrees Kelvin, right? So these are correction figures. This is not saying that this image was shot at a Kelvin. This is not measuring the color temperature of it. It's merely saying, what correction do I need to do this? I want you to take this number and I want you to drag it up. And I'm going to go up to like an 8600. That seems like a good number to me. And then I'm also going to change the exposure on this guy. I'm actually going to bump it up a full stop. Now, this isn't really trying to make this image look good. This is just trying to make a point. And then I'm going to click Done. I could go ahead and open this up into Photoshop. It wouldn't matter, but I'm just going to hit Done because I don't need to change anything else. If you then go back to your folder, you will see that there is this XMP file that I was telling you about. What this XMP file has are those two changes that we made. What it's got is that changing the color temperature, and it's also changing the value of my exposure. It's a Word document. It's a text document. So if you simply hold down your Control key, if you're a right mouse person or whatever, however you get your right mouse, I'm a control click person, you can bring this down and you can actually say open with, and I'm actually going to open mine with just text edit. It's Photoshop's, I mean it's Apple's just regular text editor. And this thing will open up, and it looks a little bit daunting here at the beginning, but the truth of it is it's not daunting at all. This is simply the XMP data. This is all the metadata of the file that you actually shot. And so you can see up here in the very top in all of this, this is where Adobe gives itself all sorts of credit. It's all packaging itself on its backlist. It's also great. But you look right here, and it just says the TIFF, the model of this camera, was an EOS 5D Mark II. And then we come down. The exposure time on this was a 200th of a second. And then my F number on this was F10. And it gives you all this sort of information. But as we start to get further down into this guy, this is my lens information that's right down here. You can see right down here at the bottom that in the processing version, the camera raw processing version, it gives you right down here, but you can see it is a custom white balance. It is a color temperature of 8600 degrees. That's what I just put in there. So that's what's being written to this file. By the very same token, if I come down to exposure value in here, I'm not even going to look for exposure, but you see what's happening here. All of that's being written into the XMP data, right? I want you to change this from 8600 to 6600. So simply change the value in there, and then save this file, and then close it up, and then double click on that same CR2 file again. And you'll notice that this comes back, and in my case this never works, but hopefully in your case it actually gave you this 4600. Did you do a 66, or did it take you back to your 46? Back to 46, yeah, I've always been made a liar. I don't know why they've changed this now, and that part doesn't really work that same way, but it does. So let's just try one last thing here. Go ahead and crank the color temperature all the way up again. It'll give you the same idea. I'm going to go to 9800, doesn't matter. And I'm going to go ahead and say done on this. I'm going to go back into my folder. It should have rewritten and updated this guy. I'm going to double click on that same guy and open it up again, and you can see it opens up. And it remembers that I set it to this 9800. It remembers that I did that because of that XMP file. If I cancel this again and go in and I throw my XMP file away and open up that folder, that file one last time, it's going to open up here like this, and you will see I'll put you back in my default. Are we good on all of this? Okay, I need everybody to stand up and come over here really quickly, and I want you to look at this little target thing that I've actually put up here. So what this is, and I'm going to ask you to crowd in, and you don't have to crowd in all at once, but at a certain point, I need you to really be able to see what's going on here. So I want to explain what's going on in here. Most of you guys, or at least I've heard some of you guys have done custom profiling for your printers, but probably not all of you, right? However, all of you use profiles for your printers, right? Mostly canned ones, so when you go to do photo, you're inside of Photoshop and you go to print something and you're working with Epson Luster or whatever, Epson Enhanced Matte or whatever, you go in and you pick that paper profile, whatever, and it actually maps color for you. And the color part works out really well, right? But it doesn't have to be those tones. So my question to you guys is, do you know where your shadows and highlights should actually be? Numerically. Most people don't. So this is how you find out. So you go ahead and do the profile because you need the color to be correct. Then you print this. This is just a grayscale ramp. This is something that I built in Photoshop. It exists. I think it's on our website and support. If it's not, somebody let me know. I will send you mine. So what's going on here is this. There's a grayscale ramp that starts. There's little square. You can see the little squares usually up in this one, in this area a little bit more. There's a little square right down here that is a 0, 0, 0. That means it's pure black, right? And then there's a square next to it that's a 3, 3, 3. Again, I didn't want to do steps that were just, 0 to 1, 2 to 3, but I want to do bigger jumps just because it's too difficult to see any other way. Does this sort of make sense? Okay, so I'm going to go all the way up here. So anyway, these are 0, 0, 0, 3, 3, 3, 6, 6, 6, 9, 9, 9, you get all the way up here. This is 21, 21, 21. Then I start here on the lower row down here. These are 24s, 27s, 30s, 33, 36, 39, 42, and 45. So does everybody understand what's going on here? Then I've got the high-end part of this as well. So in the high-end part of this as well, it starts in this row right here. It's actually 234s are here, 237s, 240s, 243s, 46s, 49s, 52s, and 55s. And you can see here at the 255, it's just completely white. It's page white, and this is what it is by definition. And finally, I've got a small scale right here that's more blown up. It's the distance between this 249 and 250. you can ignore this, you don't need to worry about it. It's this grouping that I care the most about. Does that make sense? In the black grouping right here, I put a letter V on every single one of them, and the letter V is a pure black in all of them. So it's a pure black down here, but this V up here is also a pure black. Does that make sense? And in the lighter tones up here, the V is white instead of being black. So, what is shadow detail? Not looking at this, in your lives, what is shadow detail? It's the dark parts of your image
That's
where you can still see detail, where you actually have detail. So for instance, in my case, if you look at me right now, there is probably, well, if you look under this arm right in here, there's probably absolutely no detail that's actually in there. That's not legitimate shadow detail. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have things that are genuinely black and don't have detail in them. But what and where is shadow detail? So to figure it out, you look at this grayscale ramp, and the question that I'm going to have to all of you is, at what point can you clearly distinguish the black V from the background? So I've had a lot of people say, well, I can barely see it. Yeah, somewhere right in here, I can sort of barely see it, but you can't see it. Yeah, you can barely see it, whatever. But that's not what shadow detail is. Shadow detail is not about barely. Shadow detail is that, okay, I can see discriminating detail in there. Does that make sense? And so that's what I need to do with this piece of paper. So I want all of you to look at this and tell me, what gray patch do you actually begin to see that true, distinct V from the background? And just look at the number that's either on top of it or underneath it. I've got an 18 or 21. Other people. You can get it really tight. It won't bite. We have 12 to 15. We have 18, 21. $18 to $24. Okay, so for me, when I look at this, everybody had a chance to look at this, right? For me, when I begin to look at this again, I am looking for very obvious detail behind right here. So in 18, can I make out that it actually is somewhere in there? Yes. Is that shadow detail? Absolutely not. For me, it falls somewhere in here. I'm usually in this 24 to 27 range. It's somewhere in these two for me. That's how it works out for me. Now, this is paper specific, but it gives you a general idea of what's going on, because a lot of people, when they do color correction and tonal correction in camera raw, what they do is they go in and they set a black point, and that is not necessarily what you want to do. Black point has got nothing to do with what you care about in an image. Shadow detail is everything that you want in an image. Wherever the black point falls is where the black point falls. Shadow detail is what you care about, right? Highlight detail is the flip side of that. So I need everybody now to look at the highlight part and tell me where you distinctly, let's work in the white patch and work back in our way, where you distinctly see the white D. 249? Would you guys sort of agree with that part?
like 46.
246, 249? Is it ringing a bell to anybody? Guess where the value for reading the white patch on the target came from? It wasn't some just esoteric, pull it out of the air kind of thing. I gotta be honest with you guys, I know this happens in school, I know this has happened to you. A lot of people just walk in and say, well, this is what you should do. And nobody tells you why. And nobody tells you how they arrived at that. Oh, well, somebody told me. This is why. So now we know where our white point needs to be, 245 to 250, but we also know where our shadow detail, not our black point, where our shadow detail needs to be, I misspoke, not our highlight detail, not our white point, needs to be, in my case, I usually set mine right around 25, that's what I go for. Does that sort of make sense? And again, it's based on result, it's not based on just some abstract. Are we good on this? Because then back to this guy right here, using that information. So how do I color correct and how do I deal with all of this information? So how do you guys typically, when you get into camera raw, what do you do? We had this conversation 2 days ago. Most of you guys, again, if you have something to white balance on, you look for something gray, you actually click on that, it helps, whatever. If you don't, you just start dragging slides around to make the colors pretty. I don't have enough time in my life to do that. You don't either. So I use a color target instead. As a matter of fact, I want to go ahead and I'm going to close this really quickly. So you can simply hit cancel out of this guy. I want to open both of them at the same time because we haven't talked about how you actually apply what you do in one to another. So if you would just jump out and open both of these at the same time. They'll both open up in Camera Raw right now. You'll have one sitting in the film strip, one's on this side over here, and then there's the image that I actually want to use is sitting under it. So in the one that I want to use, the information that I'm looking to gather from this, number one and the most important thing for me is the color balance. So again, I am going to color balance this. I'm going to click on the white balance tool. I am going to click on that same patch that I've used before that sits right in the middle. And again, this is just immediate and quick for me, and that's how long color correction takes for me. Now, yes, if I want my image warmer, I can make it warmer. If I want it cooler, I can make it cooler. But this is a neutral point that I always go to, that I always start at. And it's just that simple. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, and that is really all I want to do. The rest of the work that I'm going to do, because the rest of the work is based on a different vantage point of my subject matter. So the rest of the work that I'm going to do, I want to actually do it on that image. However, I want to apply the color balance that I've got off of this guy to my other one. To do that, you come up to the little drop-down menu next to the film strip, and you come out, and the first option you'll have here is to select all. That'll allow you to select the other image behind it, and then that same little drop-down menu will give you a new option now that says Sync Settings. When that happens, it will actually open up with a preset determined things, so things that you could possibly sync. The only things that we have really done on this image is we've done its white balance, but we've also done removing chromatic aberration, and we've also done the lens correction. In my case, I typically would either use settings like this. You can go in and cherry pick these things if you want to. Settings, the only thing it really leaves off is any of the crop spot removal or local adjustments. Since I haven't done any of those, it doesn't really matter. You have a whole set of presets here, though, that you could use. Most people will either use settings or everything because whatever they've done in this, they're going to want to apply to both images and then merely say OK to that. That's now applied the color settings that I wanted to this image. Oh, going back to this image right here, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually zoom into this target. And I'm going to hover over this white patch, and I'm going to get my readings that sit right here. These guys that are right here. What are those supposed to be? Again, that's my white detail. What did we just say based on that print right over there? 245 to 250. Is that what this is? No, it is not. So to fix that, I'm actually going to put an eyedropper readout on this. This is a color readout. It'll actually just lay down, as long as we've got these images open, it'll lay down points. If you click on that, you get a readout that sits right here. And it's just, you can keep going back and forth. It's just an easier way to do this so you can see it all in one move. I'm going to come over to my exposure slider, and I'm going to click on this and start to drag it up till I get that to that 245, 250 range. My highlight detail has now been set. Now, the one thing I need to warn you about is that there are people who believe then that this black patch should be your shadow detail. It's not. If you use this as your shadow detail, your image will be so contrasty. You better be doing posters for rock bands and nothing else, because nobody will be able to use your files. Do not make that mistake. The white point is, not the white point, but the white detail is legitimate. That black is not. Make sense? Okay, so this now has been set correct, and you can see that it was an exposure bump of almost a quarter of a stop. Pretty off the mark for my money, but at any rate. So now I'm going to sync again. So again, up to the settings, come down to select all. Again, sync your settings. in this case, so you can leave it at settings. Again, the only thing we've fundamentally changed is those two. Click back on this other image right now, and you'll see that it has actually put in the white point that we wanted it to put in. It's actually raised the warmth by over 1,000 degrees Kelvin. It also put in that quarter to stop. Now, in this case, I am actually going to check because I'm worried about what's happening on that skin tone in there. So I can throw on my highlight warning part right here just to make sure that I'm not actually losing what's going on in there. Nothing in here is being flagged. So now I'm going to actually zoom into this guy. And I'm going to check this highlight on this girl's face right here. And I'm going to give you guys another thing that you wouldn't learn anywhere else. So as a digital tech, this is another trick that people use all the time in terms of evaluating your exposure. So you probably want to write this down. This is hyper-specific. However, I know people, and I'm one of them, who uses this every single day that I shoot. So you guys should just know about this part. So when you are trying to evaluate exposure, everybody I know uses these cards. However, there are cases where, especially in tricky lighting, it gets to be difficult to use this card. And a lot of people get nervous when they're looking at an image and they're thinking, okay, I need backup, I need confirmation. And the backup and confirmation that most people, myself included, use is this. This only works for Caucasian skin, and it only works for highlights on Caucasian skin. So what you are looking for is a really is a highlight, not necessarily a spectral highlight. You don't want some grease patch that's reflecting direct sun, but you want the brightest spot of Caucasian skin. In this case, again, I'm going to look for a serious highlight, and you can see on the side of this girl's face, it's actually pretty hot. So I look for that highlight. The value that you're looking for is the red channel only. Should fall between 225 and 245. If it is 225, it would be considered, when you look at that image, you would think, okay, that seems to be a relatively normal exposure. At 235, in the red channel only, Caucasian highlight only, you would look at it and say, okay, that's pretty spanky, that's got some pop to it. When you get to the 245 range, anything above that, and you're going to lose detail and your ability to actually pull detail back out of it. So that's your threshold. That would be super, because people do this, it's a great trick in people who shoot beauty cosmetics. They'll blow skin tones out to the point that they have to do very little retouching. Yes? So the numbers are, so what I'm looking for is this R channel right here. I want that measuring this highlight. Again, don't come down in these other areas down here. This really hot spot in here between 225 and 245 in the R channel only. The other two channels don't make any difference, and luminosity doesn't make any difference. It's the R value is the only thing that makes a difference in this. Okay? Any questions about that? Okay, so I know that this image, at least at this part for me, that my high end is done where I want my high end to be. So that part of it is working well for me. I'm going to back out of this though, and I'm going to look at this, and what part of this image is my shadow detail? Where do I have shadow detail? So I'm going to say it's probably going to be somewhere around these shorts. It's probably going to present a good place for me to go looking for shadow detail. Wouldn't you guys sort of agree on that part? So I'm going to zoom into the shorts down here. I'm going to turn off this highlight, the shadow warning right here. I'm going to zoom in way into this area right in here. And you can see that there's this area that's basically, it's a reflection. Again, you can't see it anywhere near as well on this as you can see it on your own screens. But this area, it's sort of right where her butt's hitting the mirror part. It's sort of like right underneath that part or whatever. It's the shadow of the underside of those shorts. Well, the underside of the shorts had no detail in them to begin with. And the shadow, the reflection in it is going to have even less. So this is not legitimate shadow detail for me. That is not a place where I should have detail. If I open this image up enough to do that, it would be horrible looking. Where then does shadow detail in this image exist that truly should be? So for me, I clearly look at this part of her waistband over here, and I feel like up here at the top, certainly there should be shadow detail in here. As it's beginning to move down here, I'm not so certain that that should really hold so much detail. I'm going to look at this area that's over here, and the whole time, I'm looking at these readout numbers that are sitting right up in here. And where do I know that I need these tonal values to be in order to reproduce on that piece of paper? I need to be in the 25s. So I'm looking at this area right in here. Again, I'm not going to go on the other side of the waistband. I'm a little nervous about it. It's not only it's the fabric of the waistband, but it's also twisted down into shadow. I maybe could pick something over here on the side. I'm going to throw down another color pointer right here. I'm going to click on something right there. But I know for certain in this area that I'm running around in this part right in here, I know I want this to actually have detail in it. This is part of the fabric. I'm a fashion shooter. People are actually going to want to see that part. So I'm going to throw down another color sampler point right there. And you can tell right now that if we're looking at this, this one's in the sort of like upper teens, this sort of 15 to 28. This is not too far off from that. So this tells me what my correction needs to be. So I am going to come over to my shadow slider, and I'm going to grab my shadows, and I'm going to actually start to open those guys up. And sometimes it's not only your shadow slider. Sometimes it'll actually be your black points as well. You may need to actually lift your black point. And you can see that I've got my blacks up just slightly in there, and I've got my shadows, and I'm kicking them up just a little touch more. It's actually more black point than it is shadows. And I'm getting awfully close to where I want to be right now. And I'm going to double click this and kick back out. This image now has been color balanced and tone corrected and will reproduce beautifully. This is why I don't do test prints. I already know what's going to happen. Yes?
Can you say again what it's between?
So in the shadow details down in here, I'm looking to get to those 25. So you can see here, I've got a 26, a 23. I mean, I'm pushing things a little bit, but when we were looking at that part over there, we're sort of like, okay, yeah, that 24 to 25, or that 20, whatever, it was in that range. So I'm feeling like I'm threading the needle. If I'm still a little bit nervous about this, then I'm just going to continue to open the shadows up a little bit more. So again, it's a combination of both shadows and blacks. So I'm going to hit that up a little bit more, take my shadows up a little bit more. So now I'm up in the 25s in the red channels and the 27 in the sky. You can see these are getting into those mid-20s. Does that sort of make sense? Yes?
I guess I have two questions.
Shoot.
First, you said before that profile don't have any space, like color space?
It doesn't.
And it's like based on.
That's actually not true. The space that it has is the color space of your camera sensor.
What I want to ask is, like, we all know that profile is very gray,
Right?
and no contrast.
Right?
Are you editing contrast in the camera roll to the files? Or?
No.
No.
Mm-mm. You get what it gives you. There's no way to edit it.
Why?
In camera. Well, in camera, yes. No, that's actually not true. That's not true. So when I'm actually doing the capture in camera, when I'm actually doing the capture when I'm working in Capture One, I am setting my exposure. My exposure controls my white point.
Yes.
Not my white point, but my white detail, right? So you're all comfortable with that part, right? But then there's no other setting. What else can I do? The only thing that you can do to impact a raw file is exposure. So I can't change my exposure to have any impact on the blacks, on the shadow. I can't change those at all. If I'm in a photo studio and I feel like my blacks are blocking up, I can actually go in with a fill card. I can add another light. I can try to open those shadow parts up in the actual exposure part of it. But let's say I'm not, that's not what I'm doing. I'm shooting landscapes and I have no way to open those shadows up. Again, I've got to set my highlight detail where it needs to be. I'm accepting where the black is going to be, even if it's gone down and blocked up, or even if it's raised way too high. And then I push, if I feel like my shadows need to be deeper, I push them down in post-processing. If I feel like they need to be lightened up, I open them up in post-processing, which is exactly what I'm doing here. But exposure really controls that top end. That's what I care about.
So you don't touch at all the contrast?
No. Oh, no.
Only with the black.
No, and any of the fixes that you would do in Camera Raw or here, in Capture One or here, those are all software fixes, and they're not changing the raw file at all. The only thing that changes that raw file is exposure. That brings up a really, really, really good point. So hold that thought. So my initial exposure here, when I actually went and looked at this guy, my initial exposure here was actually a 218. I can actually come into software right here, and I can raise the exposure in software to where that's correct now. But this is strictly a software fix. This is software has allowed me to raise my exposure value on this so that this is correctly reading at 246, but it's not real. I'm not getting any more data. I am fixing a bad data set using software. The true way to do this is you've got to adjust your exposure, because your exposure is what is grabbing all of that data. That's what your data set is. To fix it in software is exactly what I'm saying. I've got half the data that I really need here, and I'm trying to make it look better in software, as opposed to changing the exposure on my camera, whether it's aperture, shutter speed, or ISO, or if it's in the studio, bumping up your light intensity, whatever it is, you want that unaltered, untouched software exposure to give you that white value in that 245 to 250 range, because then you're grabbing the most data. But you're right, then you're either, to deal with the shadows, you've got that, again, that's something that you deal with in post, or it's something that you've got to deal with using light modifiers like reflectors or fill lights or flashing cameras set to fill, or whatever it is you're doing. Does that answer what you're, okay.
And another question about the test that you're saying, you're not doing any test for the image.
Right.
But isn't it like the paper that you're printing affecting on the color of your image?
Absolutely.
And the contrast of
Yeah,
your image?
both. So that's why I've already done a custom color profile for my printer and paper, and I've printed out one of those on that very same paper. Because I'll tell you guys this, and you should know this, that 25, that mid-20s is not religion. If you only print on glossy paper has the ability to actually show you much greater shadow detail. You can go in much deeper, and most of the glossy paper that I work with, that would put that number closer to in the 15, 16, 17, 18, in that range. If you go to a serious, really textured matty paper, whatever, that detail marker right there can get up in the mid-30s. So it's just really specific to what it is you're printing. But yes, but I do all of that testing first. So, and there's one paper that I print on all the time, and I know it and I love it, but I've done all of this work on it because I don't want to do test strips. Is this making sense to you guys? Are we good on this part? Yes.
So like your test strip would be, or your test strip would be like that exposure on the paper that you're going to use.
What I do is, again, I will build a profile for the printer and the paper combination first. Then I print that target out, and I do exactly what all of us just did. I go in there and I look and I say, okay, where, I give my highlight detail, where does my highlight detail really need to be, and where does my shadow detail really need to be? And that gives me a set of values that I then use in here, not in here, in here, to do this kind of correction. Because there's a lot of people who would look at this image right now and say, well, that looks flat to me. I would want this image to have more contrast if I was going to put it online. And if you were going to put it online, that might actually be legitimate. But what I want to stress here, because I think you guys all do print, and I think you all value print, part of our very first conversation, is that this would be then what I would use. This would be how I would set this file up to do my first print. Yes?
How do you know you're adjusting the shadows if you start tempering the blacks, and how does that affect?
Okay, so it's really about range. If you actually go over to the next of the sliders over, you can actually see in the next one over, if we click on parametric, what you can see is this. This is actually a copy of your histogram right in here. And what you can see in this, although again, this is another one of those, why they still use different language. Why is it lights and darks in here, but it's blacks and whites in the thing right before it? It's basically talking about these tonal ranges. And so the tonal range for shadows happens in this area in here. So this shadow slider controls this part right in here. Then this lights, the highlight slider is right in here. The lights are actually going to be up here at the top, and the darks are going to be down here at the bottom. So it's just that range. For us, the reason we're using both of those sliders is we're on that line. We're on the line where the shadow detail drops off into non-shadow detail, something that would be darker. Well, the darker area is being controlled by the black, but the shadow area is being controlled by the shadow, but both of these have to meet at one point. And we're juggling with that, so we're playing with both of those guys to bring them up. You could conceivably, back in our image, you could say, okay, well, I wish my blacks were a little bit deeper, so you could drag your blacks back down to make them a little bit darker and try to open your shadows up even more. And you can see we're getting back to the same point. It's really just a question of what it is, where we're going with all of this. Does it sort of make sense? Yes?
So if you're following the guide of like staying in that 245 to 250 range,
Yes.
does that mean that you don't need to know the paper you're printing on?
Every single paper I've ever worked on has sort of fallen into that range for me, or it's like this. It's so close. This was a quarter of a stop difference. I can't get a quarter of a stop change on my camera using my camera controls. So I've accepted this. And I'm willing to deal with that final adjustment area in post. Does that sort of answer? But it's shockingly consistent. The shadow detail is a completely different animal.
Because I was trying to figure out if, say you're working on a project and you know it's going to print, do you need to know the printing paper before you begin testing for exposure and locking down the exposure?
It would certainly help. But the next thing I'm getting ready to show you is the workflow that I use to keep this always available to you and to never make a file. So, yes?
Why would you want to adjust the blacks and the shadows here when you've done that with the original test color?
Wait, are you talking about this guy up here? So again, this is the point that I made. If we now, let's do this. We can actually do this in reverse. Click on this guy again, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the settings back up to the card. So this guy has been set correctly. So go ahead and make him the active one, the one that doesn't have the card in it. Are we all good? Go back up to select all. And then we're going to sync, because this is now the primary, we're going to actually sync the settings back up to this top guy. So again, drop down menu here, come down to sync settings. Now all the work that we have done in this file down here in terms of opening those shadows up has been applied to this guy up here. And look at the reading that I get on the black patch of the car. It's up in the 70s. So if I wanted to make this thing actually, so this guy is still fine, it's still reading in this 246 area. But if I think this is what you're asking. Is this what you're asking? Why am I not using this as my shadow point, right? Again, it's because of the way this card has been printed. This was never intended to be a shadow point. This is strictly a step wedge. But if we look at it, look what ends up happening in order to get it there. So I'm going to take the shadows. I got to hammer everything all the way down. So this gets it down. I'm going to put another point down there. So my readout, this is exactly where I would need to be, and then take a look at this image. Everything's blocked up, everything's gone. And it's bad on screen. If you were to go to print this thing out, it would just be black. So that's why. It doesn't, that's why I warned you guys, do not, nobody ever uses the black patch on these cards. Are we good on this? Okay, I'm going to go back to this image really quickly. There's a couple other things I want to finish up right here, and then we're going to jump into a completely different arena here. So at the bottom down here, there's a hyperlink, and if you click on the hyperlink, this is how you tell Photoshop you want to bring your file into Photoshop from Camera Raw. So in the settings in here, this is where you can actually pick your color space. And in our case, we've already talked about Adobe RGB. I didn't want to hit you guys with more color today. At a certain point, we are going to visit the different color spaces that we could use. There's really only two viable for a master file, which is what I would call this. So I would deal with this file, and I think it's the way you guys should be dealing with your file, is you deal with it you want the largest file that you can have that's got the most flexibility so that As time goes on, you can repurpose that file for different things. So you could do a version of it for print, and you can do a version of it for web, or you can do a version of it for whatever you need to do. Does that sort of make sense? So what I'm looking for is the big one. I'm looking for the mother of the tree, the top of the tree that will allow me to do those variations as I go down. So that's my intent. For me, I actually use Adobe RGB for 2 reasons. 1, the best monitors in the world, that's what it can show me. 2, it's extremely close to the dynamic range and the color range of my camera. To be honest and to be fair though, cameras actually grab more information than Adobe RGB will actually show you. But my other option is actually ProPhoto RGB, and the problem with ProPhoto RGB, I'll tell you, is just this. The space is so big, in order to adequately describe that space without having huge gaps between your individual color, you have to use 16-bit. Again, 16-bit, we're talking about the number of available colors. And the number of available colors that we have here in 8-bit is, again, 256 times 256 times 256. It's 16.7 million colors. In 16-bit, that goes up to 28 trillion colors because you need that many to describe that ProPhoto space. It's so big. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine. If you want to work that way, I'm fine with you doing that. But you cannot use ProPhoto in 8-bit. If you do, the spaces between all of your colors are so big, you'll end up with getting what they call banding. So have you guys ever done pictures of, like, blue skies are notorious for this. You'll have a picture of a blue sky, and it looks like it looks almost like an illustration. There'll be swaths of color, and you see where they butt up against one another. That's called banding, and the reason you have that is because you didn't have a nuanced, subtle enough color in between those two to make that transition seem continuous tone. Instead, it just seems like these blocks of color. It seems very Japanese print-like to me. Does that happen to you guys? That's why. So, the downside to working in 16-bit, though, too, is it doubles your file size. And it doubles your processing time. So anytime you go to do anything on a 16-bit file, if it takes you 2 seconds to actually do a Gaussian blur on it, it's going to take you 4 to do it on the 16-bit version. So twice the space, twice the time. And you can't see it, ever.
Is that why you don't use it?
Yeah,
for like,
and it gets even worse. There's actually, you should know this as well, because there are diehard ProPhoto people. If you read the really techno-geek people who don't actually do any printing, they just study Adobe products all the time, they'll all tell you to be in ProPhoto in 16-bit. There's actually a part of ProPhoto's color space that's beyond human vision. It can exist in the file, but you can't see it. You couldn't see it ever. Your eyes can't see it. Mathematically, you can push your detailed information out into that space, and it's gone, because you can't see it. It seems a little bit libelous to me. So I work in an environment that I know what I'm seeing is what I'm getting. That's what I do. Okay, so I'm going to set this as Adobe RGB. That's 8-bit. Like I said, if you want, you can use ProPhoto RGB and 16-bit. There is also, in a lot of monitor stuff that's happening right now, and Apple is a big proponent of this, there is this Display P3. Display P3 is not too far different than Adobe RGB, and they're finding it easier to design and build monitors that will actually, they'll be closer matched to what we're actually dealing with. So there may be ultimately a migration to that, but nobody's really done it yet. In terms of the image sizing, I would not touch this part. In terms of output sharpening, you would never, ever, ever do that at this stage of the game because your output sharpening is dependent on the medium, it's dependent on the size, it's dependent on everything. So if you're going to do a small print, you have one kind of output sharpening. A big print would have a different one. You don't know what you're going to do. This is our master file right here. So you would never turn this part on. And then smart objects, which is how we're going to finish the day today. So how many people in this room, I asked this the other day, but I'm going to ask it again right now. How many people in this room are using smart objects? Go ahead and raise your hand. You're really happy for doing that. How many people never use smart objects? How many people in this room can tell me what a smart object really is? I know everybody uses it, but nobody knows why. We're going to talk about it, but there's a whole other number of reasons we're going to do that. So I'm going to show you what a smart object actually is. So for me, I do everything via Smart Object. So this is an opportunity that allows me to make it my default. So if you click on this and say, open a Smart Object in Photoshop, this thing will be set up the way I would recommend you actually have this set up. You'll notice that this button down here, if you never had worked with this before, it now says Open Object. If you hold down your Shift key, it'll go back to Open Image. The same thing holds true. If you never bothered to click this as open, is the check mark on open objects in here, this image would also always say open image. Just clicking on the shift key will give you the, so the shift key gives you the opposite. That's all I'm trying to say. But in this case, it's going to give us open object, and I'm going to go ahead and click on open object, and it's actually going to open this file up into Photoshop. And you'll notice that there is a little icon down here in the corner that is slightly different than a typical file would normally be. That is an indication that this is a smart object. And the thing that some of you guys already know, but the thing that we are all going to leverage to death in the rest of this class, not just today, but the whole rest of this semester, is this. That smart object allows you to double click on this file and it will open back up and your settings are all still there intact. So we're going to save this file. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit cancel here because I didn't change anything. I want to save this file, and you guys can save it as well. We're going to throw it away, so you're not going to need this is what I'm trying to say. So I'm going to do a save as. I'm just going to throw this out to you guys so that you know this exists. I use this all the time. I have a folder that says TOSS, and I name everything in the world that I actually do as TOSS. Because that just tells me that I want to throw this away. It's not important to me. It is a Photoshop file. I'm going to go ahead and save it as that. It's actually gone through it. There's a little drop-down menu here at the bottom part of the file. You can see right where my cursor is. If you click on that drop-down, you'll see that there's different things of information that you can actually put in here to control your file, which brings me to another point. We have never set color settings in this class, which we need to do in 1 second as soon as I close this up. But for me, the one that I always leave here is the document profile, because if I have a mismatch in the profile, I can spot it here right away and it'll actually give me a warning. I'll see that it says sRGB, or I'll see that it says ProPhoto RGB. I'll know what it is. I'll know, oh, okay, that's how I wanted it, or that's not the way I wanted it. We good on this? So that's just how I set mine. You can actually close this file up now. You don't need to save it. We already did save it. However, one thing that we did not get to last week when we were doing preferences, and this again, this is a UI interface thing that I do not know why they do this, but one of the most important preferences that you can set in Photoshop is the color space. It isn't in preferences, it's in the fucking edit menu. Can somebody tell me why? No. So go to the edit menu really quickly. Come down to color settings. A window will actually open up. And this is a biggie because if you haven't changed this since you bought your first version of Adobe Photoshop, you've been doing it all wrong. In this, by default, I'm going to show you the, don't change yours depending on what it is, but don't change yours. I'm going to show you the default that's actually set up that Adobe ships with. Adobe ships with this thing called North American General Purpose 2. This is, I think, Adobe crawled into bed with the people at Microsoft, and they just had a wild night of bad sex. The drugs weren't that good, the liquor was kind of bad, and in the morning they got up all hungover and embarrassed and created this. And so what this does is this sets your default working space at sRGB. We looked at that in the color utility the last time we were here together. Adobe RGB, big asshole space, sRGB, little baby space. Why would you then take your big old camera file and throw all of that color away to put it in this little bitty space? Because Adobe wants you to make really shitty, and somehow maybe they think that, I don't know, they're going to come up with something that's going to save all the shitty pictures that they make people make and charge you more money for that program. At any rate, it gets worse down here in the color management policies. It actually does say preserve embedded stuff, but if there's any mismatching that's happening in your images, in your workspaces, it's turned off all the warnings. So when you open a file that's got a mismatch, it just changes it for you, but doesn't tell you it's going to do it. So you've been really good and religious all your lives about using Adobe RGB, and you go to somebody's brand new machine, and this is set up by default like this. You open that file and bring it in. Behind the scenes, it's going to change it to sRGB, and it's not going to tell you that. And then when you save that file, all the work that you had done all those years, and that file that you'd had for decades in the right space, has now been saved in another space, and unless you have a backup, you've lost it. This is like giving a loaded gun to a baby. So, to change this the way I would recommend doing it, you want to actually pick North American Pre-Press 2. Could they get the names any closer? You know, it's like, oh, well, what? General and what? So what's really different? You know, Pre-Press or General? Oh, well, I thought I did the North American one. Yeah, you did, but it was the wrong North America 2 one. Anyway, doing this sets Adobe RGB as your preferred workspace. It still preserves all your profiles, but it puts on all these warnings that anytime you bring a file into Photoshop that is not set to work in the working space that you want to be working in, this dialog box comes open and says, there is a profile mismatch here. How do you want to handle it? And it gives you then a whole list of options about how to handle it. Does that make sense? We good on this part? Okay, so you definitely want to save that part and say okay to that. Then I want everybody to come up to the File menu, come down to Open Recent, and open the file that I just told you to throw away. And you can see it opens back up again, and you can also see that because this is a smart object, if you double click on it, you go right back into Camera Raw, and it's got all of your settings in here. So in effect, what you have done is you've gotten around that whole issue about XMP files and RAW files, all that. We have now embedded a copy of our raw data into a Photoshop file along with all of the XMP settings. Does that make sense? So now we don't have to worry about that part. We don't have to go back to the raw file again. I can change this. I can reprocess this guy right now. I don't need to go looking for the raw file. I don't need to open the raw file back up again. I've got it. It's all sitting here inside of that Photoshop file. Make sense? Okay, so how do you guys dodge and burn? Oh, well, I want to show you a couple things first. So before I get to that, hold that thought. Just 1 second. Hold that thought. So I am going to go ahead and say cancel out of this. We're going to actually try it here with this guy. I want everybody to make a copy of this layer for me really quick. So the easiest way I do it is to simply click on this and drag it down to make a copy of it. And you can see now I've got another smart object that's actually sitting on top, but the file is identical. However, I want to change this back to just a normal layer. So I don't want this to be a raw file anymore. I don't want this to be a smart object anymore. So I want you to come up to the Layer menu, come down to Smart Objects, and then down to the bottom to Rasterize. So take a look up at my screen and see where I'm at. I'm at Layer menu, down to Smart Objects, down to Rasterize. The other way that you can do, again, typical of Photoshop, give you so many ways that nobody can remember any of them. You could come down to Rasterize and do Smart Object. It'll do the exact same thing. And go ahead and click and let go. And you'll notice that that little icon goes away on it. Make sense? Okay, I'm going to turn off the eyeball on the image that's underneath it so that the only thing I'm really working with and the only thing I can see is this guy right here. Are we good on this part? And then I'm going to transform this image right here. So Command-T will actually transform it. If you can't remember Command-T, come up to the Edit menu and come down to, again, Free Transform. You'll see the keyboard shortcut right here, Command-T. So this was the behavior that I was telling some of you guys before. In the current version of Photoshop right now, this 2019, if in the old days you were to simply click on an image like this and actually change it like this, and this guy has not been changed. No, actually it has been changed. You can see that I can actually, that it doesn't, the height and the width ratio is not necessarily maintained. I can actually make it really compressed like this. I can change it like this. I can make it really flat like that. I can do all of those things. The keyboard shortcut to maintain this, to keep it together so that the ratio between the width and the height is maintained, you hold down the Shift key. And if you hold down the Shift key, then it actually changes in unison. In the new version of Photoshop, they've eliminated that, but I showed you guys the preference that you can use to go back to this behavior. Whichever one you want to use, it's entirely up to you. But what I want to do for this image right here is, I'm going to click on the link up here at the top between width and height. You will see me do this all the time because I don't like using my left hand to hold down the Shift key. I prefer to do other things. And holding down the clicking on this link between the two, now actually, no matter what you move in this, it will actually keep the relationship between those two connected. Does that make sense, everyone? You also have what they were called scrubby sliders. If you hover your cursor over the H or over the W, either one, you'll see that you get this hand that's got an arrow pointing in two directions. That allows you to click and drag in one direction and it will make your image bigger. Click in another direction, it will actually make your image smaller. Does that make sense, everyone? There's two possible checks that are over here. One of them is a check that actually says, okay, I want you to go ahead and do this transform. The other is, I want you to cancel this and go back to where you were. Now, I've set this thing off so badly, I'm going to cancel mine out really quickly, and then I'm going to simply do it again. Command-T, click on the length between width and height, and then you can actually type in a value here as well. I want you to type in 5%, not 500%, but 5%. You're going to make a really small image, and I'm going to type in 5%, and you'll see it puts 5% in the other guy over there. I want all you guys doing this with me. This is only going to help. Again, mental, eye-hand, mental, whatever. I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. I'm going to click the checkbox to go ahead and commit that, and I've got an extremely small image right now. Now, I am not going to use undo. I'm going to retransform this back to its original. To do that, hit Command-T again. Click on the link between width and height, and this time I want you to type in 2000. The reason we're typing in 2000, make sure that you clicked on the link between the two, is when I went from 100% down to 5%, it was a 20%, I was reducing it 20 times. To go back up again, I need to enlarge it 20 times, so that's where the 2000 comes into this guy. And then again, I want you to go ahead and click on the check mark to actually do it. Wow, isn't that nice? How to fuck up your image and really fuck it up. Transforms are destructive. So, throw that layer away. Go back to your smart object and turn it on. We're going to do the same thing to a smart object. Command-T to bring up the transform dialog box. Click on the chain link between the two and type in 5%. Click on the check mark to actually make it 5% smaller. It's now been crushed down like that. Has everybody got the really small smart object? Command-T again. You'll notice when you hit Command-T again that you do not get 100% reading in the width and height right now. What's happened is that Photoshop has remembered what the transform actually was, and it will let you continue to go on with it. It's not like baked into the file. That's what we call it. So if you click on the link between width and height, and you type in 100%, and hit the check mark, this image was unfazed. Smart objects are protective. They protect your file. Everybody hit the B key to get a brush and bring it on top of your smart object. You cannot paint on a smart object. Everybody hit the S key to get the clone stamp tool. You cannot clone stamp on a smart object. Everybody hit the J key. You cannot heal a smart object. None of these things you can do to a smart object, but the smart object itself is protecting the file. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is what I need everybody to think of as going on when we talk about smart objects. And it's this. I've got an image, and I have an envelope. A smart object is an envelope, and it's the way you need to always think about this. It is an envelope. And I'm taking this image and I'm putting it in the envelope. Now the image that's inside of here is protected. I can do transforms, I can do filtering, I can do all sorts of things to this, but the image that is inside is safe. I can always undo all of that. Unlike the rasterized version that we had, it's just an image that's sitting here hanging out in the wind. Does that make sense to everybody? Are we good on that part? There's another advantage to actually having a smart object, and that is smart filters. So how many people in this room have ever softened up an image, I'm going to blur that. Please don't tell me you get it for skin tones, because I know that's how everybody retouches it. That's a habit I'm going to break for you guys, but nonetheless. People soften shit up all the time, right? and then you save your file, and it's baked into the file. So when I'm going to use baked into the file a lot in this class. What baked in the file means is that you've done something and there's no way to undo it. There's no way to get back out. It's a commitment that has been made, right? Your only way to get out of it is to start the whole process over. Again, that doesn't happen in my book, right? So we're going to blur this image, but it is a smart object. So I want to come up to the filter menu, come down to blur, down to Gaussian blur, and I want you to really smack this thing hard. I want you to put in a blur. Oh, let's go for broke. Get up into the hundreds. Get up close. And say okay to that. And then you show this to an art director and you say, fine art. I was in kind of a mosaic-y, tapestry kind of mood, vibe thing, whatever. You know, it was 2 in the morning, I've been drinking. The value finally kicked in. No. What? You don't like this? But look what's happened down here. This is actually called a smart filter. And you'll see down here, you've actually got this big white square, and then you've got this thing that says Gaussian blur. If you double click on Gaussian blur, it opens it right back up, and it remembers exactly the blur value that you put in there, so you can change it. And you can say to the art director, oh, I know what you were really looking for. You wanted this. You wanted it to be so blurred, it's almost just one color. And the art director says, no, that's not what I want. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. I'm going to cancel out of here really quickly. How many people in this room know and work with layer masks? How many have no idea what a layer mask is? We're all good on that, at least on a small level. This is a filter mask, and you can work with it. Everybody hit the B key to get a brush. Hit the D key to default your foreground and background colors to black and white. Click on the actual layer mask for this filter. You'll know it's actually active because it's got the white brackets around it. And then actually come over onto your image with a brush. Now, in brushes, I will just tell you the shortcuts that I use. There's a lot of you guys, maybe you guys use heads-up display, you use different gestures to make your brushes bigger or smaller, to change all that stuff. For me, I go back before that all happened. I'm more old school, so I use the bracket keys to change my brush size. If you look at the P key on your keyboard, just to the right of the P key are 2 bracket keys. The one immediately next to the P key is makes your brush smaller. The one that's to the right of that makes your brush larger. I'm going to actually kick on mine to open it up, and I've got a weird brush that's going on in mine right now. So to check which brush that you need, you actually need to come up to this menu up in the options bar that's up right here at the top. This is how you can control many aspects of your brush. You'll notice that this thing up here, this options bar, changes depending on the tool you pick. So when we go to like the healing brush tool, this thing will change. Now there's a number of things that are the same. Opacity and flow tend to show up in most things, but here you'll have smoothing, and that exists with a brush. That won't exist with things like a clone stamp tool. But nonetheless, if you click on this drop-down menu right here, you can actually pick the type of brush that you're using. I'm going to ask you guys right now to click on Legacy Brushes. And then click on this drop-down menu again. And if we scroll up to the top of this, hopefully at the top, you've got these 6 brushes that sit at the very top of your screen. Do you guys have these? So again, I'm in this drop-down menu. Use this scroll bar on the side to come all the way up to the top. It always tries to get you much further down than where you want to be. Yes?
I have like a different brush.
You have a different brush? Do you have just little circles here?
I will say, go to the general.
Go for it. Go to the general.
Then you have like a list of.
They're actually the same brushes. It's just that this is showing you it as a stroke, but it's the same brush.
There's an album nearby where I
Oh, yeah. There's,
can just pull my shirt up
there's that guy over there, and there's this guy over here. If you want to trade with me, you can go right here, and I'll go right there.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Or you don't have 5? Actually,
No.
How do I like make the names of the show up because they're not always have the
Oh, and I'll show you. Well, I'll show everybody. So in this little drop-down gear right here, you actually put on brush name as well as brush stroke.
Alright.
The little gear, this little gear up at the top. You don't have the little gear? Photoshop has done such great jobs for us. Actually, this is not where we want to be. This is actually in the brush preset part, so we don't want to be here. We want to be over here. And this drop down, and it's this little here, right here. But you've got the same thing. If you've only got these little circles at the top, don't worry about them. They are actually the identical thing. It's these 6 brushes that exist right here. We need to talk about these really quickly. So basically what they are is these first 2 that are sitting right over here are strictly, it's a soft brush, which is just a regular soft edge, or a hard brush, which is a really hard edge. You guys know the difference between these 2, right? We don't need to go through that part, right? So the next 2, this soft round here, these are pressure sensitive brushes. When we get to working with a tablet, which I was hoping to get to today, but I don't think we are. When you get to working with a tablet, what that allows you to do is the harder you press your stylus down on a tablet, it will actually change the size of your brush. Now there's retouchers who get really good at this, and the beautiful thing about that is that they never change a brush size. They never deal with any of that stuff ever. They simply tap harder or light or whatever, and they know exactly how much. It's just incredible to see people who do that. I'm not one of those people. And then the last one down here, the last 2 over here, instead of changing the size of your brush, it changes the opacity of your brush. And we'll talk about opacity and flow later. We don't need to get to that part right now. But what I'm going to suggest that you guys use is only 2 brushes, either the soft one or the hard one. And ironically, you don't even need to worry about that much because you can change all of that up here in this menu right here. But so I'm going to refer to this all the time, and we are going to be changing brushes and the quality of brushes all the time. So anyway, I'm going to click on, in this case, I'm going to use the soft brush. You can see that I just brought up my hardness slider. I've now got a round brush that's sitting right here. The hardness slider you can actually change, and this is another one of the interface things that I don't like about Adobe, but I'm going to show this to you so you guys understand what's going on. When I click this, it just set the hardness of my brush to 0. However, I can drag this thing all the way up to 100% hard, which means it's a completely hard brush. However, this brush is still selected. However, that red line that's around it is Adobe's way of telling me that I've changed it and it's not really what it says it is. Even though that brush is selected. Now, if I was designing the UI, I would just make it go away. It would no longer be on this because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh, I've got a soft round brush, but I don't. Make sense? I'm going to click on it again just to go ahead and reset it down to my 0% hardness. It's still red. So what's wrong? I have no idea. Some engineer at Adobe needs to be, never mind. Okay, so with a soft round brush, to get rid of this without committing any mark on your image, click on the name Adobe. That flyout screen will go away. A lot of people I know actually click on the image, which gets rid of the screen, but it also throws a mark down in your image, and that's not what we want to do because then you start getting into undo and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to take my brush right now. Again, I'm going to change my foreground color to black by using the X key. And then I'm going to simply paint on my image like this.
Excuse me, I'm unable to get the brush to, like, it's the circle.
You need to click on the mask itself to actually put the bracket, no, not that, leave that on, the bracket, the mask. See the little brackets around it? Now that tells you you're painting on the mask.
Oh, okay.
So something I should tell you guys also, maybe you all still have really, really super good eyes. For me, I can't believe how small the shit in Adobe Photoshop is getting. It's like the little icons are so small and everything is so small. If you want bigger icons like I've got, and indeed I will tell everybody in here it's true, size does matter. Come over to the layers palette where my cursor is right now. Click on this drop down menu, come down to panel options and pick the large thumbnails. You can actually get rid of your thumbnails altogether. If you're the kind of person that's religious about naming all your layers and you've got 100,000 of them and you don't want all these little images, whatever, you can get rid of all of them by clicking none. But I actually like the big ones, and I'm telling you this right now, those previews actually will show you quite a bit, so the bigger the better. You can do the very same thing over here for channels by clicking on this drop-down menu, coming down to panel options, and clicking on the large thumbnails down there. And then finally, in paths as well, although we don't have any paths going up. But in panel options, again, you would pick the large thumbnail for paths. It's shocking what you can really see. But you can see right now, though, that I've just painted on this thing. How many of you people have ever painted with a filter?
Use like the lens flare.
Say what?
Use like the lens flare filter.
Yeah.
Like painted to try and make it less like digital.
Oh, well, but I'm painting with any filter I have. I'm painting with this filter. Here, let's do another thing. Come down to this image, make sure that this whole part down here is full. I'm going to show you another keyboard shortcut. I use this all the time. If you can't remember it, I'll show you the alternate way to deal with it if you can't remember it. To fill anything with your foreground or your background color, the keyboard shortcut for filling with your foreground color is the Option key and delete. So if you hit Option key and delete, you'll see that it just filled that with black. If you look at your keyboard situation, look right next to your Shift key, to the space bar, the space bar, you'll see that you have a Command key and an Option key, and they are always 1 and 2, right? They're always next to one another, right to left. So the Command key is always the one that's on the closest to the space bar. It's on the right side. The Option key is always on the left. Those are the exact same orientations for your foreground and your background color. So the one to the left, which is always your foreground color, is Option delete. The one to the right, which is your background color, is Command delete. And it doesn't matter what your colors are. So for instance, if I flip my color here so that black is now my background color, Command delete fills with the background color. It's not that it fills it with black, it's just that black happens to be my background color. Does that make sense? If you can't remember that, again, with this thing still selected, come up to the Edit menu, come down to Fill, and then in the drop-down menu, you can pick Fill with white, Fill with black, Fill with 50% gray. There's other things you can fill with, but this would be another way to actually do that. It's just a faster way to get to it. Now with your brush on here, hit the B key if you don't have it. Make your brush a little bit smaller. I'm making mine a little bit smaller using the bracket keys. Make sure white is your foreground color and start to paint with a Gaussian blur filter on your image. And this is what I meant by painting with a filter. Does this work for you guys? Now for me, this is a little bit extreme. Again, I just wanted to show that. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to double click on the Gaussian blur and I'm going to change this value. I was up in the 100. I'm going to change it to something more reasonable. I'm going to bring it back down to, let's say, around, I'm going to do like about a 5 pixel blur on it. It's just a softening blur on it. I'm going to say, okay, you don't see anything happening on your image because this black mask is still on it. Then again, I'm going to select the black mask to work on it. I'm going to hit the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger now, again, using those guys. Then I'm going to change the opacity of this brush. I'm going to drop it down to about a 50%. So again, we will talk about opacity a little bit later, but basically what this is saying is that instead of painting with a pure white on this mask that's going to reveal that entire effect, I'm going to build it up slowly. Make sense? And then I'm just going to start to work on my image, and I can actually start to blur this whole part out. And you can see it's not really strong, it's not really evident, so I hit Command Z to undo that. I'm going to drag my opacity all the way back up and do it at 100%. And I can start to work on this part to actually blur my background and control where that whole thing happens. If you want to see the difference in what's going on and what's not going on, you can turn the eyeball off on that, and you can see the difference that that has actually made in your background. Now, there are better ways, I will tell you this right now, to give the illusion of depth of field, but this is one of them. Is this working for you guys? This is all built on smart objects. You cannot do this with a regular file. If you've got a regular layer in here and you run a filter on it, it bakes that filter into that layer, and then that is just it. Are we good on this? Questions? Okay, we can throw this guy away. And now we can go to the question that I asked you guys before. How do you guys dodge and burn in Photoshop? I'm sorry? A layer mask. So you put I'm not sure what that means. Can you be a little bit more?
Make a copy of
Right,
at the photo.
right,
And go to curves.
okay. So you put a curve on it and you make part of it darker and you probably put another curve on it and make part of it lighter and you use layer masks to control where that all happens, right? That's good. Anybody else? All right, so this will be the first real, when we talk about creative advanced post-production in this, this is how the pros do it. This is the next level part. So you remember art school? You remember the 3 years it took you to get to this part. You remember all your friends here. You remember all that part. This is where the line gets drawn, and you're leaving them all behind. It doesn't mean you don't love them. You'll still talk with them, still drink with them, whatever. But this is where this is one of the reasons. There's many, I think, I hope, about why you guys signed up for this, and this is the beginning of where we're going to take off because this is next level. So we're going to start with a weird file. There was actually a guy, so the file that I need you to get to is in our class number 2. I think it's in there. In the assignment folder. And it's this thing called Bruce Fraser Copyright 2015 DNG. And I want you to double click that and open it up. Now, if you end up with a dark image that looks something like mine does right here, it's the reason this is coming in is DNGs actually are raw files, however, and they require an XMP file. However, what a DNG does to make it seem like you don't need that XMP file is the DNG is actually really a folder. It's not the raw file by itself. It's the raw file with an XMP file in the folder, and then the way it's presented to you, you simply see it as one file. And when you double click on it, it opens up and it shows you the last adjustments that were made. But I need to restore this to its defaults. I need to have this image look like the way this image looked like when it was very first shot. So to do that, come over here to this drop-down menu on the basic panel, click on the drop-down menu, and come down to Camera Raw Defaults. And this thing will kick back, and this is how this image was originally shot. Now, I know what you guys are all thinking so far. You're like, Jesus Christ, he showed me a Corvette. We worked on that. Now we're working on this bad picture of a castle. Where's the fashion in this? Okay, yeah, he threw me one image of the girl and the trees on the mirror thing, whatever, but really, please, just try to realize that these are working files to show you guys a technique. They're not designed to show you great art. Are we okay on that? So anyway, Bruce Fraser is actually a god in the Photoshop world. He wrote one of the original true books about it. There was a group of like 8 photographers here in Chicago. I'm just grabbing this guy. Of 8 photographers. Everybody got it on the sign-in list, right? Okay. Of 8 photographers here in Chicago that formed sort of it was a group, a club, whatever, that ended up putting out most of the definitive books on Photoshop and Adobe, certainly through the early days. One of those people was Martin Evening, the guy whose textbook I suggested you guys use here. Another guy in that group was Jeff Shiwi. He's also a local photographer here. He's the one who wrote the book on processing raw files. It was a serious tight collective, and they have put out really the definitive texts on working in Photoshop. This is actually one of Bruce Fraser's photographs. So it came from a book on processing. It was about processing raw files. He wrote the original one with Jeff Shiwi. So it is his copyright. He owns this image, but it was released as a working file for that book. So that's why you guys are actually able to work with it right now. I'm not going to change anything in this guy yet right here. Actually, I take that back. I am going to change something here. I'm going to give you guys a set of numbers, and the numbers that I give you are based on an old version of Photoshop. So how many people in this class ever worked with Photoshop when the original basic panel did not look like this? Most of you guys probably have. Do you remember there was a Photoshop? Do you remember highlight recovery? Do you guys remember that? You don't remember that? So is this really the first version of Photoshop? It's always looked like this to you? Oh. Yeah, well, there's older versions of it. And the values that I've got on here are based on an older version of this. But one of the things that Adobe has done correctly, that Photoshop is actually done correctly is it allows you to go back to any version of Camera Raw that existed before and process files the way they used to be processed. And the reason that I think that personally that's an amazing thing is that imagine you were working back in 2004 and you processed 100 files and they look amazing and you love it and somebody says, I want file 101, the 101st one. And you have all the details about how you processed the first 100, but now you're confronted with a completely different layout. There was no highlights and shadows. There was highlight recovery and shadow. It was just completely different. You can actually go back in time. You can go back to a previous processor to process your files. And that's what we're going to do with this one. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. And it's only because of these numbers that I've got. There's no other reason to do this. Does that sort of make sense? So to get to that back version, I don't know where it is right now, but I think it's going to be here under this guy. In our case, it's the film strip. In your, who's got the older version of... It's going to be the calibration tab. It's the one that looks like the little camera. Yeah, click on the one that looks like the little camera. And there's another thing we're going to have to look at in just a second. So I'm going to click on this guy right here. And you'll see that here it's got process versions. And if you click and look at this drop-down menu, in the old days, so what this is telling you right here is there have been 5 versions of Camera Raw. Yes?
When I opened my file from Prism, it was like really orange, it wasn't dark, and I have like 3 different processes. So I don't know if it like. Oh, no. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so for the people who have an older version, you go to the, this is not a film strip, this is a camera icon, and then when you do the drop down, tell me there's like 3 or 4 that you've got the new one. They dated the old ones. So in the old ones, it's actually 2003 is the one I think we are looking, let me see, we'll do your 2010, let me just look at this one now. Let me go back to your basic panel. Yeah, it's 2010. So, and that was, go to version 3. Version 3 was from 2010.
It's version 2.
Version 2? Sorry. I'll know when I see it right here. Yeah, go to version 2. So again, up to this calibration tab, down to version 2, process version 2. Or if you have if you have an older version of Photoshop and it's the little camera icon guy, go back to, it'll be version 2, and they date it. It's in the year 2010. So, and then click on the basic panel. So what you should see in here now is this. We no longer have those highlights and that kind of stuff in here. What we've got is exposure, recovery, fill light, blacks, brightness, and contrast. You guys all have that? Okay, so these are the values that I'm going to give to you guys, and I want you to actually put these values in, okay? So we're going to start up at the very top under temperature. So just simply drag across temperature, and I want you to type in 6800, so 6800. If you use your tab key, it will advance you to the next space, so you'll never have to select it again. For the next one, I want you to go ahead and leave that as a +7 for the tint. Go down to the next space for exposure, and this gets a little tricky. You want to type in a -0.95. I'm just going to actually drag this down to a -0.95. Hit the tab key. For recovery, you can leave that at 0. The tab key for fill, you can leave that at 0. The tab key for the blacks, you want to take that to 18. Hit the tab key again for brightness, you want to take that to 81. Hit the tab key again for contrast, you want that to be 56. Hit the tab key again for clarity, you want that to be 52. Hit the tab key again for vibrance, you want that to be 35. What is vibrance? It is selective saturation, but how is it selective? In what way?
So, yeah.
You're right about that. So there's 2 parts to vibrance that you need to keep into mind. The first is that colors that are already saturated in the image, it leaves those alone. Unlike the saturation slider that's right underneath it. The saturation slider that's underneath it will hit everybody equally. But with vibrance, what it does is it looks at the image and says, okay, if this color is already saturated, I'm going to back off on that. But the colors that are not saturated, I'm going to push them up. So it tends to be a little bit more natural, a little more believable. It's harder to get that really psychedelic weird out of when you oversaturate colors. However, it also does exactly what you were saying as well. It tends to protect yellows. It tends to protect Caucasian skin tones. And so it doesn't saturate skin tones as much. And again, it was another thing where, especially I think for people who were doing fashion, it was a way to pop skirts, to pop prints and dresses and that kind of stuff, to pop the color in that without really touching the skin tones, and then without also oversaturating anything else that was in the image. That was what it was all about. In our case, what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to process this file just for the grass. I'm ignoring the castle and I'm ignoring the sky up there. All I'm trying to do is do this part for this guy right here. And you can see in this case it's actually done a relatively good job of that. However, people have made this mistake before. People think these numbers are magic. They're not. I sat down with this file and I built this file, and this is the numbers that I actually came up with, right? So I've had people do, because there's an assignment that's going to be due, doing this very same sort of process. And I've had people use these exact same numbers for a completely different image, and it makes no sense because it doesn't. These are not magic numbers. These are numbers that are specific to this image only. Does that make sense, everyone? Are we good on that part? So I'm going to go ahead and say open object, and I'm going to say OK to that. So it brings it out here and actually opens it up. And so this is going to be the first step that I do in my whole dodging and burning part. So we could try what you try. We could actually then add a curve to this, which I'm going to do. So let's add a curve to this guy. So click on the adjustment layer icon at the bottom, come up and do add curve. We can click on the middle. We can drag it way down. I'm trying to get something in the sky. I don't care about anything else. And I've brought it down a little bit. I'm going for hope here, whatever. I don't know that I can get that. I'm going to pull this thing out of the middle and really drag it down, see if I can get the sky to, the sky just looks, I don't know, shitty, whatever to me, but that's okay. We'll go for that. And then I've got a layer mask that's sitting right here. So now I asked you guys about layer masks before. Now, I'm going to move on like we all know layer masks. But if we don't, you are going to be absolutely hating the rest of this whole 6 weeks. So I need to make sure you're masking, you really, really understand the mask. So in a layer mask, what happens is that wherever there's white, white reveals. So in this case, I've put this serious curve on here, and all of this entire image is being impacted by that because the layer mask is completely white over the entire image. If I select the layer mask itself and put the little brackets around it and hit Command-I, that inverts the mask and makes it black. And now none of that curve is impacting the image because the mask is hiding everything. So white reveals, black conceals. Middle gray is partially revealing. So if you click on your foreground color picker and open it up, click on the little brightness button here in the middle, drag your slider down to 50% brightness. That will give you a 50% gray. You'll notice that your RGB values are all 128 and say OK. Then I can come over in this image and I can paint an area in my image that is 50% gray. This is allowing half of that curve to be applied to this, but not the entire effect. Yes?
Can you just go back to
I sure can. So I'm just going to fill this with black again. So where did I lose you?
Well, I just had something messed up with my settings. So I got you put your finding middle grade 50%.
Oh, okay, so just here in this part.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So I just picked, if you click on the, I had white was my foreground color. So if you just click on the brightness radio button.
Wait, so white should be the foreground?
Yes. Yeah, if black is the foreground color, the same thing will work though. And you just need to click on the brightness, which turns this column into the brightness slider, and then just put it here in the middle. Or you could simply type in 50. Or if you're old school, you type in 128, tab 128, tab 128, and you get to all the same place. Okay, so I'm going to say OK to that. And again, then I'm going to paint in here, and that actually puts in, again, a 50% gray in there. So I'm getting part of that effect. Does that sort of make sense? If I go to a little bit lighter color, so I'll click on my foreground color again, and I'll drag this up. I'm not going to go all the way up, but I'll go up to like a 76, say OK. Then it actually brings in a little bit more of it. So that's basically how a mask works. Are we all comfortable with this? Okay, if you're not, you really need to we need to get together outside of this class. So I will be happy to do that. We are already meeting on Friday afternoons, so I will be happy to get together with you guys on Friday mornings because your day is probably screwed anyway. I just want everybody to know, even though we meet to an exhaustive extent in this class and will be, I am available. I have promised you guys I'm going to get you through all of this, and it is my mission, come hell or high water, to do that. So I will do that. I will meet with you outside. We will figure out a time and a way to get together. If a group of you guys, because clearly there's friends in this group here, whatever, if a group of you get together and go, God, I've watched the video twice and I'm lost, I don't know what it is, and somebody else goes, yeah, me too, whatever, let's all of us get together, or whatever it takes to get this to work. I'm up for that, okay? I do it all the time. All right, so, but this is the best that we're really getting in this deal right here. Again, I'm going to go back to white. Hit the D key to default your colors back to black and white. White is now my foreground color, so I can paint in the sky, and that just looks god-awful to me. And the reason this looks god-awful is that this file that we're looking at, the illusion in this smart object, is actually a baked file. And what I'm trying to do is change the tonal structure of a baked file. Again, do you guys get what I'm talking about when I say a baked file? Okay, this is not an option for me. I'm going to throw this guy away. I'm going to make a duplicate of this smart object right here. I'm going to click on it and drag it down to make a duplicate of it. And I'm going to double click on the top version right now. I'm going to double click on this top version. And I'm not going to go through a whole lot of these settings because there's going to be a problem with this, and I want to show you the problem right away. I'm going to take my exposure and I'm going to drag it down. That looks like a better sky to me. It screws up my grass and all that kind of stuff, but that's okay. This is a better sky for me. So, and then I'm simply going to hit OK. And what you need to look at as happen is that it's both of these smart objects got reprocessed. They are both dark. And the reason that is that this second smart object on the top is not really a true smart object or layer. What it is a reference to the smart object underneath it. It's just a reference. It's not a true independent smart object on its own. It's saying, okay, if you're doing this to me, we're going to do that to everybody. So here, look, make another copy. Let's make two more, actually. Make two more. And I don't care which one you grab. Just double click on any one of them. And drag the exposure back up to 1.75 and say OK. And that happens to them all. Because they are all merely references to one single smart object. Does that make sense to everybody? And this actually has a place. This really does have a place. And everybody goes, well, why on earth would this be like this? This is true cloning in Photoshop. So imagine that you are a wallpaper designer, and you are designing wallpapers of little bumblebees. And you make this Photoshop file that you are going to send to the printer, and it's got 1,000 layers with 1,000 little bumblebees on it. That you have just, again, you made the one, and then you just you then made another copy of it, another copy of it, and you laid it all out, whatever. And the art director looks at it and goes, "Wow, that's really beautiful. Is there any way you could add just one antenna?" And you go, I've got to go through 1,000 files and add one little antenna 1,000 times for 1,000 files. If you have true cloning like this, you simply add the antenna to one file and it adds them to all 1,000. A color change will change all 1,000. A shift in exposure will change all 1,000, and it's that fast. So there is a place for this, but not in what we're doing and not what I'm trying to show you guys today. So over in your history palette, I need you to scroll back in your history palette to when we actually did duplicate layer. And in the duplicate layer, it should bring you back to where we've got these two smart objects, and they both look like they are done relatively correctly. Does that make sense to you guys? So does everybody have an image that's looking like this now? Again, please don't, if something is not working, you guys have been pretty good about this, but please stop me. I know it's getting late in the day, but please stop me because I really need you to do this part. This part's really, really, really critical. Yes?
I didn't have a hard time. Every time I try to duplicate my image, it will like just pop up on my screen.
My short term is Command J.
Yeah.
Just duplicate it.
Yes. It'll do the same thing. However, we're getting ready to go beyond that. So this is true cloning, and it happens. We don't want true cloning here. What we want are independent smart objects. So I need you to throw away that top one now that you've been able to make it. I need you to throw that guy away. And here's the trick. If you take nothing else away from all afternoon today, this is the one thing you got to take away. This is the one thing you got to remember. This is the one thing you got to write down. You got to rewatch the video. You got to make a note of this somehow, because this is the only way you can do this. This is the only way this works. Up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to new smart object via copy. So again, look at my screen and see where I'm at. Up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, over to new smart object via copy, and let go. And it looks like exactly the same thing has happened. That's another thing that I have a struggle with Photoshop, is there's no way to know that this was done differently, but you're going to see it different in just a second. So did this work for everyone? We good on this? All right, well then let's find out. I need you to double click on this guy and open it up. And I'm going to give you a new set of numbers to fill in here. So let's start at the very top and click across this, my color temperature. I'm going to leave that at 6800. I'm going to hit the tab key. I'm going to leave my tint at a +7. Hit the tab key, come down to exposure. And exposure, I want to knock that down to a -1.5. Hit the tab key. I'm going to go to recovery, and I'm going to, I take that, hang on one second, guys. I take this back. We have time to get through something else. Let's start this over.
Okay, wait, I have a question.
Shoot.
When I double click on it, it like opens a new window in Photoshop. It's not a smart object, but it's on here. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, but it's opens here.
Okay, no, I think I know what's happening here. Just tell me if this is what happens. And this may be what's happening to you. I'm going to cancel out of this really quickly. So, if you double click on the icon, it will work. It'll do what I want you to do. If you double click on the name here, it'll change the name. If you double click on the layer towards the right side, it will actually open up a style window for you, which is not what we want to do. So where you're double clicking on this layer matters. So I'm hovering over the icon, and I'm double clicking, and what's happening? Oh, let me see. Go ahead and double click on it. Yeah, so go back in history. And we need to go back in history. This is actually a rasterized version of that file, and it's being protected. Don't go all the way back. Come down to, yeah, we've actually gone way too far back, because this was no longer, when this got converted to a smart object, we lost it. So throw this guy away. You can close up the whole thing and actually reopen the file. And I'll give you the values really quickly so we can find it.
That's right.
And I'm going to check this.
Yeah, that's what we want to build. This is where we want to
Are we good?
build. Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, and I'm going to give you these values really quickly. It's just
They're all the same.
oh, actually, you did bring it. Oh, perfect. So go ahead and say, don't open image.
Oh.
You need to open this as a smart object. That's going to be what the problem was.
Oh,
That's
because
okay,
it was
that's
different,
okay.
because it was an old.
Exactly. Don't save that guy. Open it up one more time. And in this case, just hold your shift key and that'll change to open object. And click on that. Now it's a smart object. So now up to your layer menu, down to smart objects, and over to exactly, and then double click on that guy, and you'll be where we need to be. Okay.
Is that okay?
I'm just a little bit confused about the whole layer. I was writing it down and
I can redo it. Okay, here, let's do this. I'm going to cancel out of that. Cancel out of yours. Throw this top layer away. Are you good about this? We're good up to this point, right? Okay, in the old days, you could simply drag this down and make a copy of it, but that makes the true clone. That's not what we want to do. So to make a copy that is a true copy, not a clone, up to the layer menu, down to smart objects, down to new smart object via copy. And it'll give you a second layer that looks identical to the first one, but it is not. Are we good? So then double click on the, let's do this. While we're here, double click on the name on the bottom one, and let's just call this grass. Double click on the top one, and let's just call this sky. It'll help keep things a little bit clearer. Are we all good? Okay, double click on the sky to bring it into Camera Raw. Is that working for everyone? Okay, these are the values that I want you to put in now. Drag across the color temperature at the top, and we're going to change this to 4,700 degrees, which actually makes things bluer. Hit the tab key. You can leave the tint at 7. Hit the tab key again and go to a -1.5 stops. So drag this down to a -1.5. And if you get to 149 or 155, whatever, you can be pretty close on this. Hit the tab key again. Recovery goes up to 96. Hit the tab key again. Fill goes to 0. Hit the tab key again. Blacks go to 32. Hit the tab key again. Brightness goes to 60. Hit the tab key again. Contrast gets dropped down to 6. Hit the tab key again. Clarity goes all the way up at 100. Hit the tab key again. 0 vibrance, and tab key one last time. 0 saturation. And it should look something like this. Again, ignore the ground, ignore the castle. We're just looking to do the sky. Is that working for everyone? Are we good on this part? Okay, so again, I'm simply going to say okay to this. And now, unlike our previous time, we're changing the true clones. I've now got a version of the top here that is processed just for the sky, and a version down here that is processed just for the grass. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay, I'm going to do one last thing here. I'm going to turn off the sky. I'm going to come down and click on the grass again. So I simply turn the sky eyeball off. I'm going to do one more layer here, and I just want it in between these two. I like to keep my layer ordering stacked, sort of. I go from back to front or bottom to top. In this case, I'm going to go bottom to top. I want to do one of these for the castle, and so to do that, I want it in between the two. Does that make sense what's going on? So I'm going to, again, go back up to the layer menu, down to Smart Objects, New Smart Object via Copy. It's going to make a copy of the grass sky. I'm going to double click on it and call it Castle. And say OK to that. I'm going to double click it to bring it into Camera Raw. And inside this one, I want you to put in these values. I'm going to leave 6800 as my color temperature. I'm going to hit the tab key and go to 7 for my tint. Same thing. But down in the exposure, I want you to drop that to a -1.5. Tab key down for recovery, 52. Tab key down for fill, 27. Tab key down for blacks, 16. Tab key down for brightness, 91. Tab key down for contrast, 68. Tab key down for clarity, 100. Tab key down for vibrance, 0. And for saturation, last tab key down, 0 as well. We good on this? So while we're still here, I want to point out, see this little triangle that's right here that's got the warning mark on it? That's simply telling you that you are not using the most current version of Camera Raw, which is by design. We are deliberately not using it because these numbers, I would have no values to put in for you. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, just so you know what that is. If you were to actually click on that thing, it will take you to the most recent version of Camera Raw, so don't click on it. So I'm going to say okay to this. Okay, I'm going to start with the heavier one first. I'm actually going to go after the sky. So I want you to turn the sky back on. Yes?
I'm sorry, can I have the data for the castle one last time?
Yeah, I'm going to just show it to you really quickly. So it's the color temperature is 6,800 degrees. The tint is a +7. The exposure is a -1.5. The recovery is 52. The fill is 27. The blacks are 16. The brightness is 91. The contrast is 68, and the clarity is 100, 0 vibrance, and 0 saturation. Okay, so I'm going to go after the sky on this first. So we need to talk about the first of our selection tools. So if you were to select this sky right now, how would you select it? Oh,
Start with a quick selection.
of course. Quick selection tool is the easiest. If it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, it's horrible. But if it works, it's great. That quick selection is my go-to guy. It's like, okay, yes, I like that. So to get to the quick selection tool, if you look at your tool palette up here at the top, come down. It's the one that looks, again, poor icon. It's the one that looks like a paintbrush with a lasso next to it. And if you click on the lower right-hand corner of this, you'll see there's a little arrow down there. You'll get a flyout menu, and you have either the Quick Selection tool or the Magic Wand tool. I'd really like you to select the Magic Wand tool first. It's not that we're going to use it, but there's something in the Magic Wand tool that we actually need to deal with, and it's this. In the sample size for all your tools, if you haven't never used this kind of stuff before, you should have a sample size here that says point sample. Is that what you guys have? Point sample is far too specific. And the problem that you run into with point sample is this. You can have in an image file in Photoshop, you can have what they call a dead pixel. And it's a pixel that simply is black. It's a failure in the file. It's simply a black pixel. They call it a dead pixel. But unless you're looking at this stuff on a pixel level, you never pick that out. You'll never really know that that happens. They also have things in here called hot pixels. They're forever white. They're always white. There's nothing you can do about it. You can never change that. Again, there's not a ton of them, and it's at the pixel level. You rarely see that. But if you leave your sampling point at point sample, you can actually hit a hot pixel or a dead pixel, and in which case it won't do what you're hoping it will do. It will completely skew you. So most people actually will do the drop-down menu here and set it at a 3x3 average or a 5x5. If you're working in the typical files that we're going to work with, a Canon file, Nikon file, that kind of stuff, 3x3 is probably the best place to be. If you are working with super high-res stuff off of a medium format, you might go to a 5x5. What it's doing is instead of picking a single pixel, when you do that 3x3, so this is just a pixel grid that I'm going to show you here really quickly. This is the grid on the back of your sensor, and these are just pixels. If you had it set at point sample, it'll pick just one, and that's it, and whatever it is. And again, if that's a dead pixel or a hot pixel, it screws you. For a 3x3, it does this. It picks a 3x3. So it actually picks 9 pixels, and it averages those together, and it is it's much more forgiving. If you do a 5x5, it's this. Those are the pixels at the bottom that bother to draw. All right, and then tolerance in this. You need to set the tolerance in this because the tolerance that you use in here is what's actually used. I'm going to bump it up to 32. It's what's actually used in the for the quick selection tool. So we're bumping it up, and what tolerance is really doing is that when you use the quick selection tool or when you use the Magic Wand tool, when you actually click on a tone or click on anything in your image, it will say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to look at that tone, we're going to try to pick that tone, but we'll also pick 32 tones lighter and 32 tones darker. When mine was set to 5x5, you should have said 30. Did yours say 32 when it was opened up? That's the default. That's why we're resetting it. It has an impact on how the quick selection tool works. It's the only reason I'm pointing this out. So now we can actually go back to the quick selection tool by, again, clicking on that same drop-down little corner and pick the quick selection tool. Now the quick selection tool is a brush. I'm going to make mine a little bit larger. Again, I'm using my bracket keys to actually make it a little bit bigger. You remember I told you that because of our layout here, we could actually use the hand to get this image to be as big as we could possibly get it to work on this image. Come over to your hand really quick and just double click on it. And you'll see it actually gets your image as big as it can be and still see the entire image. Again, if you were to double click on the magnifying glass, it'll take you to 100%. That's not really going to help us. Double click on the hand again, it takes us back to 100%. But the image is big without any of being hidden underneath any of the palettes. So the way this tool works, again, I'm going to go back and click on the quick selection tool. And you can see that I've got this brush size that's actually happening here with my center. I know exactly where my center is. You'll also notice that the option bar has changed up here at the top, and in the option bar that's changed up here in the top, you will see that you've actually got, instead of the original just selection made, whatever, you've actually got a quick selection tool that's got a plus on it. And what that plus means is that no matter how much you go around this image, it's only going to add to your image. Does that make sense? Everybody do this for me really quickly. Hit the L key to get a lasso tool. And just draw a selection. I just drew a selection, right? You guys are all familiar with the lasso tool, right? I just made a selection. As I come over here, I'm going to go pretty far away from this selection. I'm going to click and draw and make out another selection. And you see what happens. All of the selection tools in Photoshop, when you go to draw a new selection, it gets rid of your original one unless you use modifier keys. It's never, ever, ever an addition. It's always, okay, I'm going to get rid of that guy and I'm going to start something completely new. The quick selection tool does not work that way. Again, hit Command D to deselect. Go back to our quick selection tool, and you'll notice that up in here, this little icon, there's this plus next to it. If you wanted the quick selection tool to work the way all the other selection tools work, you would click on this first icon. And now if you were to draw quick selection, it would make it. But if you were to start another quick selection somewhere else, it would get rid of the first one. Most people don't want it to work that way. Most people do want it to start to work and then want to be able to add to it. So by default, this plus is on. There's also a negative version of this which will allow you to subtract areas from a quick selection that's made. So I'm going to leave on the middle one here. I'm going to come over to the side here, but we need to talk about how the quick selection tool works, and it's this. It's designed to do one thing, and that one thing is detect an edge. So the way this tool works is this. I'm going to start trying to, what I want it to do is find the horizon. However, if you cross the horizon with the tool, it's not going to look for the horizon anymore. It's going to start looking for a line further down here in the image. It's going to be looking for an edge down here. So the true secret to the quick selection tool is you can never touch the edge you want it to find. Does that make sense? Then the last thing I'm going to say is that you need to give Photoshop all the help you can possibly get it. When I look at this image right now, I want it to select the horizon line. Is the horizon line really distinct in this version of this image? I can see it, but it's not that distinct to me. Turn off the eyeball of your sky layer. Isn't that a much, much, much stronger edge? Again, I've got much, much greater contrast without that sky being processed down to being close to the tone of all the grass and the castle and everything else. That is a much cleaner, sharper edge than this. Wouldn't you guys agree? So don't make Photoshop work harder than it has to work. Don't be working on this layer to do it. We're going to use it on this layer, but we don't need to make it from this layer. There's people who will actually put a contrast curve on an image to bring edges out even more to make the quick selection tool more effective. Does that make sense to everyone? I know this has been a long day. Are we okay? We're hanging in there? I know it's a lot. It gets better, I promise. I swear it does. Okay, so with this version of this selected, I'm going to use the quick selection tool. I'm going to start up in the lower right-hand corner. I'm going to come down, and again, I'm not going anywhere near the castle, and I'm not going anywhere near the ground that's on the ground down here. I'm not touching any of that shit. The quick selection tool, by definition, is actually a very smart tool. It's got AI built into it. It looks at what you're beginning to select, and it says, okay, he's going after this. I'm going to finish this in the way I think he wants this to be finished. And it does a reasonably good job of it. It's not a perfect job, I will tell you that, but we're not going to get into refining this right now. We will refine this on Friday. But it makes a relatively good selection part of it, right? So then I'm going to go back to my sky image. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to click on sky, and I'm going to apply a layer mask. To apply a layer mask, it's this little icon that sits down at the bottom of your layers palette. It's the one it's the square that's got the little circle in it. If you hover over it and you set your preferences up the way I suggested, it will show you that it is add layer mask, and you click on that and it'll actually add a layer mask for you. So now I've got the sky that's been processed one way, I've got the grass that's been processed another way, and yet I've still got the castle, and the castle's the one that's showing me in the middle, and I'm going to turn him off because this is really what the grass should be looking like, and this is what the sky should be looking like. But I need to make a mask for my castle in the middle. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so I am going to turn this castle back on the way it's been processed. If you hold down your spacebar and the command key, you will get the magnifying glass. Even though you've got the quick selection tool selected, you can temporarily grab the zoom tool by holding down spacebar and command. You get the zoom tool, and let's zoom into the castle. And I'm going to fill this screen as much. Now, I went too far. So to back this off again, simply add the option key and you get the negative tool. And now I've got a castle that I feel like I can actually select. I can work on using the quick selection tool. So I'm not getting any better edges using anything else. I'm going to go ahead and leave the sky where it is right now. I take that back. I'm not. I'm going to turn the sky off. That's actually a better edge up on the top. So I'm going to take it. I'm going to go for that. So I've got the quick selection tool is still selected. I'm going to come over this, and you can see that my brush is way too big for this. You remember I told you your brush cannot touch, the quick selection brush cannot touch any single edge that you're going for. So in this case, it's going way beyond. It's going into the grass, it's going into the sky above, whatever. So I use the bracket key, the key that's right next to the P key, to actually make this guy a little bit smaller, and I'm going to go down pretty good in this. Then I'm going to come over here to the left edge of the castle, and I'm going to click and start to draw out. Now you'll see it's already grabbed part of the grass. Don't worry about that right now. I'm continuing to work my way over. It grabs the turrets. It's got that part. I'm going to go up to the top, and it's done a reasonably good job of the castle. However, it's missed this little lower corner over here to the right. So I'm going to hold down Command Space Bar to zoom into this. And then again with because it's still in the plus state. Remember, this is always the plus quick selection tool is there. I'm going to click on this and it grabs the rest of the corner. Again, it's not a perfect selection. I don't want to get into refining selections today. We will deal with that on Friday. But I'm going to zoom back out now because I know I've got another problem. If you want to simply move the image, hold down the space bar by itself and you will temporarily get the hand. And you can see that it has selected a huge part of the grass here. I don't want that selected. So you have two options. The first is you can actually click on the negative quick selection tool up at the top. This will now change. If you look at the center mark inside the brush, you'll see that there's a minus in there right now. When we had the plus one on, there was a plus inside there right now. You can do that and try to refine this selection, or with the plus selected, simply hold down the option key and you'll see that little thing changes to a minus. And again, we're going to drag along this edge, but you do not want the tool to touch the edge you want it to find. So don't go dragging across the whole top of this grass. Drag just below it, and you'll see that it actually begins to do a reasonably good job of that. I got as far as I could go, then I'm going to simply hold down my space bar, click, and drag this a little further to the side so I can see the rest of what I need to get rid of. Hold down the option key and continue to refine this to do the refine quick selection tool part. Again, don't touch the edge you're looking to get to. You can get close, but don't touch the edge itself. Now there's some still little problems up here at the top. Again, these are not the things to go after right now. However, I'm going to back out. I'm going to double click on the hand to kick back out. How many people in this room save selections? Well, that's going to change right now, because how long did that just take us? Too long, right? So I don't want to do it again. I can save a selection with this file. To do that, come up to the Select menu. The one thing we don't have in this class is a power strip down the middle of the table. I am desperate to get that other room, because doesn't it have power down the middle of the table? We're going to get, somehow, we are going to get this right, I promise you guys. So at any rate, to save a selection, go up to the Select menu, come down to Save Selection, and it'll open up a window, and we're going to call it Castle. And say OK. So you can hit Command D to deselect right now, and the selection around the castle goes away. If you want to load the castle selection again, go up to the Select menu, come down to Load Selection, and in this drop-down menu, you should have a thing that says Castle. And simply pick it and say, OK, and it brought your castle back. To see where the selections are stored, they're actually stored in your channels palette. If you come over here to the side, you'll see down here at the very bottom, there's this thing that says Castle. If you hit Command D to deselect again, the way we are going to do selections for the rest of our lives in this class automatically is hover your cursor over the icon that says, the channel that says Castle. Don't select it, just hover over it. Hold down the Command key and click once, and it loads that as a selection. It does not pick this channel. That's what would have happened if it had picked the channel. That's not what I want to do. I simply wanted to load that selection. So don't worry about remembering this now. We will deal with this for all the next classes. We will be doing this over and over and over again. Shoot.
Wait, when I press Command and click on it, it just selects the whole.
Hit Command D first, just to make sure everything's deselected. And then come over here to your channels palette and scroll down to the bottom. And scroll this little bar right here. That's the castle. So you don't want to pick that, you just want to hover over it. Hold down Command and click. It loads it, and then scroll up to the top and just pick the whole color guide and you'll be fine. Okay. And now you see this red thing all the way back down. You got to turn the eyeball off. That's what you want to pick back down. And you're good to go. Yes. Okay, so you're on this guy right now. Command click on this guy. And then come up to Select. Save selection. Yeah. And then press Enter. Okay, so finally we're going to put this layer mask on the layer that it's meant to be on. So I'm going to click on the castle layer guide, go again down to the bottom of this of my layers palette, and click on Add Layer Mask. Turn back on my sky, and this is how you dodge and burn for the rest of your life.
You just say that one more time.
Sure. Where did I lose you? I'm going to get rid of the mask on the castle. Okay, I'm getting rid of that part. I'm going to turn off the top part because this is how we basically had it, right? So, okay, so I've got the castle layer is selective and active. You can tell it's selective and active because it's got the highlight on it. If you come over here again, you don't want to pick the channel itself. You simply want to hover over it, hold down the Command key and click, and it loads this thing as a selection. And what it's doing is it's looking at the channel. Anything in the channel that's white is active. Anything that's black has not been selected. And that's why this is what's going on here. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, so then come back to your castle layer right here, and then down to make sure it's active, and then come down to the bottom and add layer mask. That is now only showing us the castle. If you turn off the grass on the bottom, the only thing you can see in this layer is the castle because the layer mask is controlling that. However, we process this layer for the castle. We processed the one underneath it for the grass, and then the one on top we processed for the sky. You guys cannot do this in a baked file in Photoshop. You saw how bad that file was that we started with. Now again, I'm not claiming that this is great art, but I am saying that this changes everything about dodging and burning. Because every one is the raw file. It gets better. Save this file. I'm going to call mine again. You do need to save this file. You need to turn this in for your homework. But we just did your homework. There's other homework that you're going to have to do. But save this guy because you're turning this into me on Friday. Right? And you've already got, if you've followed along with this, you've already got 100 on this one. So, yay. Okay, so I don't need to save this, though. I've got more than enough of these. Anyway, I'm going to come up and do Save As. I would just call yours Castle. Again, you'll name this differently when you turn in your homework, but we will talk about that on Friday. C-A-S-T-L-E or E-L. Anyway, in this drop-down menu, make sure that this is a Photoshop file. How many of you guys in here are saving TIFFs instead of Photoshop files? That's fine. I have no problem with that. If you want to continue doing that, that's fine. They do the exact same thing. There's no one advantage over the other. Some people claim TIFFs are a little bit smaller. Some people think There's no difference, so you're welcome to keep doing that. So either, whenever I say Photoshop file, I mean Photoshop or TIFF file. I just don't want you to say this is a JPEG or something else, because that will bake the file. And I'm going to go ahead and save this guy. And I'm going to close this thing up now. I'm going to get rid of it. Now, you would think, okay, if you're working in Lightroom and you've actually reprocessed this file 3 times, you only have the most current version of how you processed it. We would have the Castle version. We wouldn't have the grass version. We wouldn't have the sky version. We would have the last one that was done, right? Because anytime you work on a file in Camera Raw, or anytime you work on a file in Lightroom or that kind of stuff, it overwrites the adjustments that you had made up until that point. That's that works. That's how it all works for you guys, right? Go up to your file menu, come down to Open Recent, open the Castle back up. I have got 3 copies of raw data in this file. If you double click on the one that says grass, this is the XMP data that processed the grass, and it's in my file. Cancel. Go to the Castle one. This is a completely different set of XMP data that's processing this raw data that's in my file. And then finally, cancel out of that one. The sky, this is the settings, this is the XMP raw data processing this raw data this way that is also in my file. That is an impossibility to do in any other program I know. Yes?
So you said a DNG is the XMP file plus the...
Yeah, yes, it is. So I can try to show that to you. I don't know if this will work, but before we move there, I just want to make sure everybody's clear about what we just did here. We have reprocessed raw data. There is no dodging and burning in the world that's better than processing your raw data. Your raw data is everything the camera could give you. It is not like you remember when we tried to put a curve on here and bring that sky down. Did the sky look anything like this? No, because that was baked data. That's not all the raw stuff that existed behind that had been baked into that small little tonal range. But we went back in and grabbed the entire data set and reprocessed the whole data set, and we could get skies that look like this. Now, if you said you could easily say to me, and justifiably, well, Versa, this is just way too extreme, that sky, come on, it shouldn't be anywhere near that intense. Simply pick the sky layer, come up to the opacity slider. You'll notice if you hover your mouse over the opacity slider, you get the scrubby slider. Simply click and drag the opacity down, and it changes how much you impacted the sky. If you go all the way down to 0, you essentially turn the layer off, and that was the original sky. So you have all of this stuff in between, all this way to work, all sorts of magic in this, but you cannot do this any other way. And it's a game changer. You can do things with your files you never thought possible. So, in answer to the question about a DNG, and I'm not certain I can do that, but I'm not certain it'll let me do this, but we're going to see. This is the DNG file right here. And no, it's not going to let me do this. They've hidden this from us. They're not going to let us get into here, but just realize that that's what's going on. Basically, what this was like, if you go back to our original Woods, remember we had this file right here, and we had the XMP file. What a DNG does is this. It creates a new folder. It puts this and the XMP file into the folder. It names the folder exactly what this thing was called. And then it's almost like it makes a zip out of it. So I'm going to just compress this guy. So you see this file right here. It's a zip of this folder. That's kind of what's going on with DNG. But they're separate. The raw data is in there separate because you can't change that raw data. And then that XMP file is in there. But they put them together to make it seem seamless to you. It's meant to be easier for you. But again, that would defeat our whole purpose trying to do what we've just been trying to do in Photoshop, because you would only be able, whatever processing you did would be the last, you get the last one, but you don't get 3. We good on that? Are there questions about this? Okay. Got one last thing to show you. Really quickly, we should go over homework. I don't know if I'm going to get to the last thing and show you, but we'll definitely try. So I'm just looking at our homework really quickly. So, and then on session 2, again, these are the homework assignments that you've actually got going. The one that we just did was this parametrically dodge and burn file. The process that we just went through is what is called parametric editing. And what that means is that it is a processing non-destructive workflow. That's what the parametric stands for. So it is that process of using multiple smart objects to actually create different layers to dodge and burn, and then use masks to dodge and burn the difference. Now, it's interesting because this could go back to what you do with curves. When you do your dodging and burning with curves, you could go in and hand paint these masks as well. You could reprocess a file so it's darker, reprocess one so it's lighter, reprocess one that's normal, and simply go in and hand paint them. Does that sort of make sense? So there's ways that you can do other things within all of this. It doesn't need to simply be this. But at any rate, there are a series of assignment folders in here, and what I'm asking for this, if you look and read this first one, hopefully it's pretty explanatory about what's going on in here. It should be pretty in-depth to explain to you what I'm looking for. But basically what I'm looking for you to do is to generate a custom sensor profile for 4 different sessions for me. It's what we did the last time we were together. You guys remember that part? Where we used the DNG profile editor or the color passport checker software to create a custom profile for the sensor. That's the first assignment that's here. It should go relatively fast. All of these should actually go relatively fast. The second one down here is that's to create a first one in there. This second one right here is to simply apply that DNG profile and color balance the file. You'll actually see there's color cards in all of these guys. We have parametrically dodged and burned this version. There is a raw file in here, though I want you guys to also parametrically dodge and burn. It's a picture of a girl carrying a shopping bag, I think, is the one that's in here. And then again, there's some readings in the resources up in here. If we take a look at the readings that are actually up in here, you can, if you understood the whole thing that we did with f-stop, shutter speeds, and ISOs here, that's all reciprocity is about. If you understand it, you don't need to read this guy. Digital imaging basics, I'm going to tell you to hold off on that one for just a little bit. I don't want to, I'm already overloading you. I know that that's happening. I don't want to overload you anymore. So you can hold off on this one. And then there's no real reason for you to read the Eric Chan thing on DNG, so you can avoid that guy as well. So I'm making your homework so much simpler. What I do want you to make sure, though, that you remember is that the reading assignments for the first session that we had, so I'm going to go back to this, the one on here in the first session that are separated out as specific reading assignments, it's this one right here, the no plastic sleeves and the image idea generation. The image idea generation is 2 pages, 3 pages long tops. The no plastic sleeves is a little bit longer. Want you to make sure you get through that by the weekend. Okay, we've got to have that conversation on Monday. All right, so you've got time to work on that one. Are there any questions about any of this?
What's the assignment
For
for
coming up? So again, all of this stuff, if you go to our Canvas site, and you can, if you're on the home page, you can either click on Session 2 button, or you can go to Modules, either one. I'm going to go back to the home page. modules, and it will drop down, and you will actually see here under session 2, these are the assignments right here, the things that say assignment.
But like for 2.1, when it says for each capture session in the assignment folder,
Yes,
which assignment folder?
the assignment folder in class 2. So, sorry, I know that may seem obvious to me, and there's no reason it should seem obvious to you. So it's talking about in our class folders, the assignments that I gave you.
Yeah.
I'm getting there. Class 2 files, inside the student files, there's this thing that says assignment folder. It's these.
Okay. Got it.
Are we good? Yes.
When we don't submit this, we're just gonna like have them put them onto a hard drive when we get here next time.
Yeah, so what's going to happen again, these files get really big. So again, we'll go through that whole process. The only way you're going to be able to get them to me is I'm going to pass that hard drive around. I realize that this is a pain in the ass. I didn't design this system. I'm stunned that you guys don't have a central server here for the school, but I guess it's security. I don't know what it is, but it seems. I'm not complaining. Yes.
So in the past, I had set in my, as a color profile, gray gamma 2.2.
Yes.
Do you think, I think that was just one of the standards I was given.
Yes.
Do you think the dot 20 is a good one to handle grayscale images? Or?
It all depends on what you're really doing, and it really only has, the only impact that's ever going to really come into play is if you actually do a conversion to a grayscale. Most people never convert to grayscale. Most people will simply put on a black and white adjustment layer so that they still have the color information to leverage. So unless you're really doing the converting, that part doesn't matter. If you are doing the converting, then it really matters what your target printer is going to be. And then things can change dramatically. So depending. What I typically do if I'm doing conversions is my preferred method, and have any of you guys, I mean, because this is a Matt Siebert constant, done duotones, quadtones, tritones. Did you guys get to that with Matt? It's really the best way in the world to black and white print. And in which case, most of this doesn't matter. The way you convert it doesn't matter. Remember though, when we actually were doing our color calibration, we were setting up the color calibration values, and I said the gamma was the contrast control of your monitor, and we should set it at 2.2. Leaving that as a 2.2 color gamma, a grayscale gamma setting in there will match your monitor. That's what it's trying to do. So if there's a compelling reason, if you're using a different conversion and you, for an effect, for results, and you like it, then there's no reason not to go ahead and continue to use it. But the one that will do the least amount of change for your monitor, because your monitor has been calibrated to see a contrast curve, gamma curve of 2.2, would be to go ahead and leave it at 2.2.
I have been doing some film scans,
Right.
and I think they were coming out as the gamma 2.2 from that scanner.
Could easily be. Again, it's been a long time since I've worked with that software, so we would have to go into the weeds and look at it. But I know there's somebody else that was in somebody else shoots a lot of film, and you show only film, right? Yeah, we can look at scanning software if you guys want to at a certain point and see if we can't get into those weeds a little more. Any other questions? Hang in there. It will change your life, I promise. All right, I'll see you guys on. We're Friday at 1, right?